Chapter 1509. Otherwise, why would he say that Xiao Qingyu was the clan head of the Xiao clan? His words were cleverly said, not only putting Wu Jueqing on a pedestal, but also ensuring that he would not participate in the battle. Not to mention that Wu Jueqing was definitely not the Li clan's helper. Even if he was, he would be too embarrassed to say it now. Don't talk nonsense, I won't fall for it. If I'm really here to help the Li clan, no matter how beautiful your words are, I will still take action. Let's get down to business. I'm only here to say one thing. I want to say something seriously, said Wu Jueqing indifferently. He turned around and pointed. Do you see that? That little girl over there is my disciple. Xiao Qingyu raised his eyes and took a look. Instantly, his face turned bitter. At such a distance, even a peak-level supreme martial artist wouldn't be able to see anything. He didn't know what Wu Jueqing was pointing at, but there was no doubt that he was pointing at the Li clan. That is my only disciple, Chu Luer, Wu Jueqing said indifferently. She is there now. I don't wish for her to be harmed by anyone. That's all. Everyone was speechless. That was the enemy's command center, the absolute core area. Now it had become a restricted area? They couldn't move anymore? And that's all? What kind of words were these? What kind of situation was this? There was already a strategy in the previous battle plan. When everyone wanted to join the battle, they would gather the most elite experts to execute a decapitation operation to eliminate the Li clan's high-end combat power. Now that Wu Jueqing said this, wasn't it obvious that he was biased? But if they didn't agree? They didn't dare to? Even a peak-level supreme martial artist like Xiao Qingyu didn't dare to. Seeing that no one agreed, Wu Jueqing was a little angry. His voice became a little colder. That is my disciple, my only disciple. Do you all understand? His tone was close to berating. Everyone only felt a lump in their chest, almost unable to breathe. But facing Wu Jueqing, facing the poison doctor, who dared to say no. If the Allied forces didn't hesitate to fight, they indeed had the ability to kill Wu Jueqing. But at least 80% of the people present, or even more, would be wiped out. And it was only a possibility. The results of the battle belonged to everyone, but their lives belonged to them. Against Wu Jueqing, there was the possibility of being consigned to eternal damnation at every turn. Whoever was willing to take the lead, whoever took the lead would be done for first. Xiao Qingyu pondered for a moment before replying respectfully. We naturally wouldn't dare to offend Senior Wu's beloved disciple. But now that the two sides are at war, it's inevitable that your beloved disciple won't be taken care of properly. Senior Wu, since you don't intend to participate in the war, why don't you take your beloved disciple away from the battlefield? That way, you can have the best of both worlds. He thought to himself, Wu Jueqing is the god of plagues, so his disciple must also be the god of plagues. Even if she's just a little girl, her use of poison is equally terrifying. If he could send these two demons away, he would be able to avoid a lot of losses. Wu Jueqing rolled his eyes. What are you talking about? My disciple is still young, and accompanying an old man like me every day isn't very interesting. I'm also old, and I don't understand what this little girl likes to do. Now that she's finally found something fun to do, how can I interrupt my disciple's fun? Xiao Qingyu's mouth was agape. Looking at Wu Jueqing, he almost couldn't believe his own ears. He couldn't help but feel dizzy. Play? Something fun to do? Don't interrupt your disciple's fun? This. These words were really too powerful. To be able to say such a thing, it was truly too strange. This is a battle of life and death between both sides. You guys are here to play? Your disciple is playing with the lives of tens of thousands of people on our side, and you actually want us to play with her? We can't hurt her. What the heck? Xiao Qingyu's face was bitter. He said, We naturally don't dare to offend your disciple. But if your disciple attacks our people first. This? Wu Jueqing was furious at once. How can I care so much? It's her freedom to attack whoever she wants. Can I restrict my disciple's freedom? But if others attack her, it's a provocation to me. Wu Jueqing. I will never forgive them. Shao Qingyu and the high-level supreme martial artists of the various clans almost fainted. What was he saying? Was there anything more pompous, shameless, and unreasonable than this sentence in the world? I know you're protective of your disciple, but you can't be so protective. You've really become the role model of the heavens. Only your disciple is allowed to attack others, and that's actually her. Freedom? This freedom really makes one speechless. And the counterattack of others is actually a provocation to you. Then if your disciple attacks us, can we only wait with our necks stretched out? If your disciple actually thinks that it's dirty, then shouldn't we wash our necks clean before being slaughtered? Instantly, resentment filled the air. One of them couldn't help but say, Elder Wu, isn't this a little unreasonable? Wu Jueqing rolled his eyes and laughed strangely. Unreasonable? Have you heard? When have I, Wu Jueqing, ever been reasonable? Suddenly he took a step forward and said with a smile, What is reasonable? Come, explain it to me. That person was so scared that he kept retreating. He said repeatedly, Yes. Elder Wu's words are reasonable. Everyone felt aggrieved. For a moment, they even felt like cutting their own throats. Wu Jueqing took in all their reactions. He let out a cold laugh and said, You're right. Staying in this world is the truth. Let me reiterate again, I will not participate in your battle. This kind of worldly battle formation is indeed completely meaningless to me. However, if my disciple is injured because of this, then, no matter which clan he is injured in, there is no need for that clan to exist anymore. Everyone cursed in their hearts. Motherfucker, you've already stepped forward to take sides, and you still have the cheek to say that you won't participate. If you're not participating, then what are you doing here? Are you here to do some freaking performance art? No matter how nasty the curses were in their hearts, no one dared to make a sound. At this point, whoever made a sound would be the unlucky one. Everyone could tell that Wu Jueqing was a little angry. His eyes also had some malicious intentions, as if he was looking for someone to show his power to. Who would be willing to step forward and be this chicken to warn others? Even if their heads were kicked by a donkey, they wouldn't step forward. Wu Jueqing smiled and said, Shao Qingyu, do you think I can do it? Shao Qingyu's complexion turned purple. He took 2 deep breaths and forcefully suppressed his anger. Senior's divine might is unparalleled. Destroying a mere clan by yourself is naturally as easy as flipping your hand. Wu Jueqing laughed and said, Well said. My request is that simple. Since that's the case, I'm relieved. Everyone, fight as you should. Just don't make any mistakes. I'll take my leave now. Then, he actually smiled. That little girl is actually here to play. If you let her play happily, won't everyone be happy? Her name is Lure. Lure, of course, has to be happy. His white figure soared into the sky with a whoosh. With a turn in the air, he disappeared without a trace. Only then did everyone feel the huge pressure on them disappear instantly. They all let out a sigh of relief. Did everyone hear that? Shao Qingyu said with a dark face. No one is allowed to touch that little girl. Don't make any mistakes. And don't make any mistakes. Everyone felt so wrong that they wanted to die. Motherfucker, what is this? You already told us not to make any mistakes, and you still want us to fight as we should? How else can we fight? Motherfucker. Who the hell wants to touch that little girl? We want to touch the people around her, that master of calculation and manipulation, Mo Tianji. Now, if we touch Mo Tianji, that little girl definitely won't let us. If we touch that little girl, Wu Jueqing will definitely not let us, and the consequence will be that our entire clan will be destroyed. But if we don't move, are we just going to watch that little girl calmly command us? And we're even responsible for letting her play happily. Won't everyone be happy? Pooh! How could you say something like that? If we don't all die, will your disciple be happy? If we want to let her play happily, then we'll all commit mass suicide. Should we be happy just because her name is Lure? Then if I change my name to exterminating the world, won't I really exterminate the world? Damn it! In all the wars that we've never fought with such grievances. Yi Xiaoyao said. Elder Xiao is right. Everyone, don't make any mistakes. Whoever wants to touch her can do it. Anyway, the Yi clan won't touch her. Everyone rolled their eyes. Motherfucker! Xiao Qingyu cursed angrily and turned around. Everyone hung their heads dejectedly. They felt as if they had eaten feces. The imposing aura and high fighting spirit just now were actually reduced by half. On the contrary, the aura of the other side was like a tsunami. The sound of killing was earth-shattering. Everyone's blood was boiling. The battle was about to begin. At this moment, both sides that were about to fight to the death were silent. Diwu Qingru looked at the vast plains in front of him and was really puzzled. On such a flat terrain, what exactly did Mo Tianji rely on to be so confident and sure of dealing with him? The main battlefield of the two sides was surrounded by mountains. Only the boundary of the heart was unusually vast and empty, like a plain. This was a little strange. Battles that took place on such a battlefield were usually only suitable for frontal assaults, and not for any kind of strategy or layout. No matter how ingenious one's improvisation was, in such a vast plain, one would lose most of the opportunities. Because no matter what changes one made, in such an environment where there was almost no concealment, the other side would definitely see it at the first moment. As long as there was no fundamental error in judgment, it would not affect the outcome of the battle. And with Diwu Qingru's wisdom, it was absolutely impossible for him to make a fundamental error in judgment. In other words, Mo Tianji had chosen this place for the decisive battle. And this was tantamount to fixing himself in a position where he was bound to lose. There was such a huge disparity in strength between the two sides. Yet they still chose to fight head-on without taking advantage of the terrain advantage. Wasn't it puzzling? Bookhouse. 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 And Mo Tianji didn't look like someone who would commit suicide. Further north of the plains was a continuous stretch of mountains. This was the location of the final battle that Diwu Qingru had predicted. Chapter 1510. The Li clan, as the host, had the advantage of being familiar with the terrain. Wouldn't they be able to unleash their strength better? Taking advantage of the situation and defeating the enemy was the right way to go. Not only Diwu Qingru, but even Chu Yang, Tan Tan and the others also fixed their gazes on this place. However, Mo Tianji took the initiative to move the battlefield 1,000 miles forward. In this way, the geographical advantage was gone. The Li clan, whose actual strength was far inferior, lost the geographical advantage and became even weaker. What was Mo Tianji trying to do? Xiao Qingyu and the others rushed back and told Diwu Qingru about Wu Jiucheng's interference. This news was enough to affect the final outcome of the battle. Naturally, they had to inform the leader of the final battle as soon as possible. However, what puzzled everyone was that Diwu Qingru wasn't angry but happy when he heard the news. Under such an absolute advantage, if he still wanted to use the decapitation operation to assassinate Mo Tianji, and disrupt the morale of the army and destroy the last source of confidence of the Li clan, he would be clearly bullying them. In a battle between two armies, there was nothing they wouldn't do. Diwu Qingru could use the decapitation operation against anyone. Even against Chu Yang, the master of the Calamity Sword, as long as there was a need, he would still use the decapitation operation without hesitation. He would first destroy the command pivot and the pillar of confidence of the enemy. However, against Mo Tianji, whether there was a way or not, he was absolutely unwilling to use such a method. He could be despicable and shameless on the battlefield, but he couldn't touch the command pivot. Because Mo Tianji was the same as Diwu Qingru. He was an existence that fought with his brain. The battle between them was only a battle between the wise. They only relied on their own intelligence and wisdom against the enemy. If he couldn't give Mo Tianji a relatively fair fight and simply used the strongest force to crush and kill a wise man, even Di Wuqingru himself would feel that he had an unfair advantage and wouldn't feel any sense of accomplishment. He might even develop an inner demon because of this. He would vaguely feel that he was afraid of losing to Emotianji. That was why he used such a purely violent method that shouldn't be used. That was why he didn't agree with such a strategic plan. If it weren't for the insistence of the clan heads, Di Wuqingru would have completely rejected this proposal. Now that Wu Juqing had intervened, Emotianji could use this as a pretext to make a fuss. This was exactly what Di Wuqingru wanted. Therefore, Di Wuqingru didn't feel the slightest bit of disgust towards this unfavorable variable. In fact, he was actually very grateful to Wu Juqing. Why did Emotianji choose that place for the final battle? Emo Laer was very suspicious. When the two of them saw that there was no movement, they also went down to take a look. He had just returned. Due to Emotianji's change of plans, their ambush location became somewhat far away from the battlefield. As the last and strongest successor of the Black Demon, Emole naturally had a lot of knowledge about battle formations and killing. Top-notch assassins were the most sensitive to geographical environments. However, she was clueless about Emotianji's choice. She really didn't understand why Emotianji had given up on a good location for the decisive battle. Time, location, and people, these were the essential elements of a battle since ancient times. The time was decided by both sides. So, it was indisputable. As for the people, the decision-makers of both sides had the highest authority, and no one could disobey their orders. Therefore, both sides were more or less equally matched in this aspect. Moreover, Emotianji's overall fighting strength wasn't taken into account. As for the location, it was almost the only place where Emotianji and the Li clan had a slight advantage. Yet, Emotianji chose to do the opposite and gave up his advantage at the crucial moment of the decisive battle. It wasn't that Chu Yang didn't have any doubts about this either. He was also very confused. Rubbing his chin, he said, "This battle formation, what is it for? Is it to set up a battle formation? But even if it's a battle formation, it's not like Di Wuqingru doesn't know it. In the face of superior forces, even the most mysterious battle formation would be useless." Emo Qingwu smiled lightly and said, "I advise you not to waste your time thinking about it. If you can guess my second brother's intentions, Di Wuqingru would have guessed it long ago too. Don't worry. My second brother has never been willing to take a loss when doing things. Since he has set it up like this, he must have his reasons. Just watch his performance." Chu Yang nodded in agreement. "Little Wu is right. It's because even we can't understand it that Di Wuqingru definitely can't either. Although I don't understand, I have a feeling that Di Wuqingru will definitely suffer a big loss this time. Emotianji is so evil." Emo Qingwu said unhappily. "How is my second brother evil? Doesn't he just like to pretend to be mysterious so that people can't understand him? That's not to the extent of saying that he's evil." Seeing that Emo Qingwu didn't agree with him, Chu Yang smiled obsequiously and said, "Whatever little Wu says is right." "You're right. Women still need to be coaxed," he thought in his heart. With the past and present misunderstandings resolved, it seems that Emotianji's status is showing signs of rising. This won't do. I have to suppress him as soon as possible," Emo Qingwu said. "But second brother is indeed quite annoying sometimes. For example, every time he succeeds in his schemes, I want to turn around and leave when I see the smug smile on his face." Chu Yang said in surprise. "Smug smile? What smug smile? Does Tianji have that kind of smug smile? Why didn't I notice it?" Emo Qingwu curled her lips and said, "That's because you're ignorant. Every time his face shows that kind of mysterious and confident smile, it's when he's the most smug in his heart. Every time he makes people run in circles, he'll smile like that. He's especially good at pretending. In the eyes of others, he's a strategist and has a great demeanor. But only I know that at that time, he's already bursting with joy, beaming from ear to ear and getting carried away." Chu Yang's face was full of sweat. "At most, I said that he's bad. You're not happy, but what did you say about him yourself? But in the end, no one knew him better than his sister. Mo Qingwu's memories from her past life had recovered. Coupled with the impressions of this life, her analysis of Mo Tianji could be said to be at the level of an expert. He might not be able to analyze other people so thoroughly, but analyzing Mo Tianji was as easy as taking something out of his pocket. It was incomparably accurate. He was the brains of a generation, the peerless military advisor. In this world, the only person who could restrain him was his younger sister. This matter, no matter how you looked at it, was a little comical, or rather, it should be said that everything has its nemesis. The greatest nemesis of Mo Tianji was none other than Mo Qingwu. Regardless of the joys and sorrows, the sun rose as usual. It added a lot of magnificent and fantastical splendor to this land before the battle. It hadn't appeared in this northwest land for hundreds of thousands of years. But today, the sun shone brightly. The beautiful scenery created was enchanting, enough to dazzle anyone. It was unknown if the heavens and earth also wanted to bear witness to this vast battle, but a cloud of snow mist suddenly rose into the air. It floated in the air, neither high nor low. Under the illumination of the sun, it transformed into a rainbow-colored rainbow. Moreover, it was constantly changing shape and color. At times, it was like a rainbow that traversed the heaven and earth. At other times, it turned into countless galloping horses that soared into the sky. At other times, it turned into pavilions and towers. Everyone couldn't help but be a little fascinated by this strange sight. At this moment, it was as if everyone wasn't here to fight but to sightsee. However, just as everyone was watching this rare spectacle with rapt attention, a figure suddenly appeared in front of them. Mo Tianji said indifferently, "Elderly, Gong Mi Heaven Absolute Divine Formation, start setting it up immediately." Li Chunbua nodded and waved his hand. The people below immediately got into action. Then, the flags fluttered and swayed. The team of 8,000 people immediately gathered. Mo Tianji's gentle voice rang in the air. "Brother Diwu, the formation has been activated. Do you dare to break it?" Mo Tianji was challenging him. Formation? Diwu Qingrou's heart skipped a beat. He raised his head and looked over. 7 to 8 people suddenly leaped out from the opposite side. They descended from the mountain as if they were riding on clouds. Then teams of martial artists emerged from the clouds in front of them at an extremely fast speed. Like long dragons, they swarmed toward the battlefield. Could it be that Mo Tianji wants to compete with me in terms of formations? Diwu Qingrou's eyes were solemn, but he was sneering in his heart. Mo Tianji, should I say that you're overestimating yourself or that you're underestimating this battle of wits? One wrong move and you'll lose everything. A rash decision will lead to an irreversible defeat. It's definitely not just a matter of words. Mo Tianji, you're obviously too rash. In the Li clan team, the 7 to 8 supreme martial artists led by Li Xiangxi at the front had already crossed the central line between the two sides. However, they still didn't stop. The speed of supreme martial artist experts was not to be underestimated. In the blink of an eye, this group of people had advanced another 17 to 18 miles. Their current position was already not far from the Allied forces. Even with the naked eye, they could already vaguely see them. If the entire area was compared to a straight line, then their current position was already 2/3 of the way. Just as the Allied forces were about to move out to meet the enemy, the momentum of the 8 supreme martial artists suddenly stopped. They attacked at the same time. However, their target wasn't anyone on the Allied forces' side. With a loud boom, snow filled the sky. Snow flew into the air, blurring one's vision. Even the strongest experts couldn't see anything under such low visibility. They could only hear the continuous sounds of attacks and explosions. The 8 supreme martial artists seemed to be carrying out some kind of work in that thick fog. Diwu Qingru waved his hand, indicating for everyone to calm down and not act rashly. They should wait for the enemy to come. He wanted to see what kind of tricks the other party could come up with. Since Mo Tianji was challenging him directly, it meant that the other party must have made arrangements. However, no matter what arrangements Mo Tianji could come up with, Diwu Qingru had absolute confidence that he could break them. Coping with all changes by remaining unchanged was a military principle. Chapter 15:11. The Li clan, as the host, had the advantage of being familiar with the terrain. Wouldn't they be able to unleash their strength better? Taking advantage of the situation and defeating the enemy was the right way to go. Not only Diwu Qingru, but even Chu Yang, Tan Tan and the others also fixed their gazes on this place. However, Mo Tianji took the initiative to move the battlefield 1,000 miles forward. In this way, the geographical advantage was gone. The Li clan, whose actual strength was far inferior, lost the geographical advantage and became even weaker. What was Mo Tianji trying to do? Xiao Qingyu and the others rushed back and told Diwu Qingru about Wu Jiucheng's interference. This news was enough to affect the final outcome of the battle. Naturally, they had to inform the leader of the final battle at the first opportunity. However, what puzzled everyone was that Diwu Qingru wasn't angry when he heard the news. Instead, he was happy. With such an absolute advantage, if he still wanted to assassinate Mo Tianji and disrupt the morale of the army and destroy the last source of confidence of the Li clan, it would be obvious that he was bullying them. In a battle between two armies, there was nothing they wouldn't do. Diwu Qingru could use the method of decapitation against anyone. Even against Chu Yang, the master of the Calamity Sword, as long as there was a need, he would still use decapitation without hesitation. He would first destroy the command pivot and the pillar of confidence of the enemy. However, against Mo Tianji, whether there was a way or not, he was absolutely unwilling to use such methods. He could be despicable and shameless on the battlefield, but he couldn't touch the command pivot. Because Mo Tianji was the same as Diwu Qingru. He was an existence that used his brain to fight. The battle between them was only a battle between the wise. They only relied on their own intelligence and wisdom to defeat the enemy. If he couldn't give Mo Tianji a relative fairness and simply used the strongest force to crush and kill a wise person, even Diwu Qingru himself would feel that he had an unfair advantage and wouldn't feel any sense of accomplishment. He might even develop an inner demon and vaguely feel that he was afraid of losing to Mo Tianji. That was why he used such a purely violent method that shouldn't be used. That was why he didn't agree with such a strategic plan. If it weren't for the insistence of the clan heads, Diwu Qingru would have completely rejected this proposal. Now, with Wu Jiucheng's interference, Mo Tianji could use this as a pretext to make a fuss. And this was exactly what Diwu Qingru wanted. Therefore, Diwu Qingru didn't have the slightest bit of disgust towards this unfavorable variable. Why did Mo Tianji choose that place for the final battle? Mo Laer was very suspicious. Just now, when the two of them saw that there was no movement, they also went down to take a look. He had just returned. Due to Mo Tianji's change of plans, their ambush location became somewhat far away from the battlefield. As the last and strongest successor of the Black Demons, Mo Laer was naturally well versed in battle formations and killing. Top-notch assassins were the most sensitive to geographical environments. However, she did not understand Mo Tianji's choice. She really didn't understand why Mo Tianji had given up on a good location for the decisive battle. Time, location, and people, these were the essential elements of a battle since ancient times. The time was decided by both sides. So, it was indisputable. As for the people, the decision-makers of both sides had the highest authority, and no one could disobey their orders. Therefore, both sides were more or less equally matched in this aspect. Moreover, Mo Tianji's overall fighting strength wasn't taken into account. Location was the only thing that Mo Tianji and the Li clan had a slight advantage in. Yet, Mo Tianji chose to do the opposite and gave up his advantage at the crucial moment of the decisive battle. It wasn't that Chu Yang didn't have any doubts about this. He was also very confused. Rubbing his chin, he said, "This battle formation, what is it for? Is it to set up a battle formation? But even if it's a battle formation, it's not like Diwu Qingru doesn't know it. Against superior numbers, even the most mysterious battle formation would be useless. Mo Qingwu smiled lightly and said, I advise you not to waste your time thinking about it. If you can guess my second brother's intentions, Diwu Qingru would have guessed it long ago. Don't worry. My second brother has never been willing to take a loss when doing things. Since he has set it up like this, he must have his reasons. Just watch his performance. Chu Yang nodded in agreement. Little Wu is right. Because even we can't understand it, Diwu Qingru definitely can't either. I don't understand it, but I have a feeling that Diwu Qingru will definitely suffer a huge loss this time. Mo Tianji is so evil. Mo Qingwu said unhappily. How is my second brother evil? Doesn't he just like to pretend to be mysterious and make people unable to understand him? That's not to the extent of saying that he's evil. Seeing that Mo Qingwu didn't agree with him, Chu Yang smiled obsequiously and said, Whatever little Wu says is right. You're right. Women still need to be coaxed. He thought to himself. With the past and present misunderstandings resolved, it seems that Mo Tianji's status is showing signs of rising. This won't do. I have to suppress him as soon as possible, Mo Qingwu said. But second brother is indeed quite annoying sometimes. For example, every time he succeeds in his schemes, I want to turn around and leave when I see the smug smile on his face. Chu Yang was stunned and said, Smug smile? What smug smile? Does Tianji have that kind of smug smile? Why didn't I notice it? Mo Qingwu curled her lips and said, That's because you're ignorant. Every time he shows that mysterious and confident smile on his face, it's when he's the most smug in his heart. Every time he makes people run in circles, he'll smile like that. He's especially good at pretending. In other people's eyes, he's a strategist and has a great demeanor. But only I know that at that time, he's already bursting with joy in his heart, beaming with joy and losing his sense of measure. Chu Yang's face was full of sweat. At most, I said that he's bad. You're not happy, but what did you say about him yourself? But in the end, no one knew him better than his sister. Mo Qingwu's memories from her past life had recovered. Coupled with her impression of this life, her analysis of Mo Tianji could be said to be at the level of an expert. He might not be able to analyze other people so thoroughly, but analyzing Mo Tianji was as easy as taking something out of his pocket. It was incomparably accurate. He was the brains of a generation, the peerless military advisor. In this world, the only person who could restrain him was his younger sister. This matter, no matter how you looked at it, was a little comical, or rather, it should be said that everything has its nemesis. The greatest nemesis of Mo Tianji was none other than Mo Qingwu. Regardless of the joys and sorrows, the sun rose as usual. It added a lot of magnificent and fantastical splendor to this land before the battle. It hadn't appeared in this northwest land for hundreds of thousands of years. But today, the sun shone brightly. The beautiful scenery created was enchanting, enough to dazzle anyone. It was unknown if the heavens and earth also wanted to bear witness to this vast battle, but a cloud of snow mist suddenly rose into the air. It floated in the air, neither high nor low. Under the illumination of the sun, it transformed into a rainbow-colored rainbow. Moreover, it was constantly changing shape and color. At times, it was like a rainbow that traversed the heaven and earth. At other times, it turned into countless galloping horses that soared into the sky. At other times, it transformed into pavilions and towers. Everyone couldn't help but be a little fascinated by this strange sight. At this moment, everyone seemed to not be here to fight but to sightsee. However, just as everyone was focused on this rare sight that was hard to come by in 10,000 years, Mo Tianji said indifferently, Elderly, Gong Mi Heaven Absolute Divine Formation, start setting it up immediately. Li Chunbua nodded and waved his hand. The people below immediately got into action. Then, the flags fluttered and swayed. The army of 8,000 people immediately gathered. Mo Tianji's gentle voice rang in the air. Brother Diwu, the formation has been set up. Do you dare to break it? Mo Tianji was challenging him. Formation? Diwu Qingrou's heart skipped a beat. He raised his head and looked over. 7 to 8 people suddenly leaped out from the opposite side. They floated down from the mountain as if they were riding on clouds. Then teams of martial artists emerged from the clouds in front of them at an extremely fast speed. Like long dragons, they swarmed toward the battlefield. Could it be that Mo Tianji wants to compete with me in terms of formations? Diwu Qingrou's eyes were solemn, but he was sneering in his heart. Mo Tianji, should I say that you're overestimating yourself or that you're underestimating this battle of wits? One wrong move and you'll lose everything. A rash decision will lead to an irreversible defeat. It's not just a matter of words. Mo Tianji, you're obviously too rash. In the Li clan's army, the 7 to 8 supreme martial artists led by Li Xiangxi at the front had already crossed the center line between the two sides, but they still didn't stop. The speed of supreme martial artist experts was not to be underestimated. In the blink of an eye, this group of people had advanced another 17 to 18 miles. Their current position was already not far from the Allied forces. Even with the naked eye, they could already vaguely see them. If the entire area was compared to a straight line, then their current position was already 2/3 of the way. Just as the Allied forces were about to move out to meet the enemy, the momentum of the 8 supreme martial artists suddenly came to a halt. They attacked at the same time. However, the target of their attack wasn't anyone from the Allied forces. With a boom, snow filled the sky. Snow flew into the air, blurring one's vision. No matter how strong an expert was, he couldn't see anything at all under such low visibility. He could only hear the continuous sounds of attacks and explosions. The 8 supreme martial artists seemed to be carrying out some kind of work in that area of thick fog. Diwu Qingru waved his hand, indicating for everyone to calm down and not act rashly. They should wait for the enemy to come. He wanted to see what kind of tricks the other party could come up with. Since Mo Tianji had challenged him directly, it meant that the other party must have made arrangements. However, no matter what arrangements Mo Tianji could come up with, Diwu Qingru had absolute confidence that he could break through them. Countering all changes by remaining unchanged was a military principle. Chapter 15:12. Diwu Qingru smiled. By then, we won't be breaking the formation but a one-sided massacre. A head-on battle between 8,000 people and 8,000 people. I predict that our 8,000 people will only lose a few hundred at most, or even less, and we will be able to wipe out the 8,000 people of the other party. At the side, an 8th-grade supreme martial artist muttered. Didn't you say that you want a fair battle? Battle formations? In this case, won't it become a conspiracy again? Diwu Qingru snorted and said, I've already said that this is a decisive battle. What battle formations? For Mo Tianji to make such a decision, it's his mistake and not us being despicable. This is a decisive battle. Naturally, we'll use all means possible. Everything is for the sake of protecting our own strength and attacking the enemy. Where is there any fairness? All the supreme martial artists expressed their agreement. Yes, yes. If we still insist on a fair battle with the other party at such a time, we'd really be out of our minds. Don't tell me that we have to accept the other party's suggestion of a decisive battle? One of the supreme martial artists nodded fiercely and said, Yes, do we have to accept the other party's suggestion of a fair one-on-one duel? With hundreds of thousands of people taking turns to fight, we may all die of old age before the battle is over. Everyone couldn't help but burst into laughter at once. As they spoke, Li Chunhua's voice came from afar. Gong mi divine formation! Do you dare to fight it? Fight with formations! Xiao Qingyu laughed and said, Chunhua, this time, I'll let you win. His voice was full of confidence. Yes, with Diwu Qingrou's arrangement, this extremely dangerous, extravagant and sturdy formation of the other party was just a complete joke. Like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood, the battle would be decided. Diwu Qingru waved his hand and a series of muffled drum beats sounded, seemingly shaking the whole sky. Group after group of experts from the big clans, with bloodthirsty expressions and murderous auras, quickly got into formation. In order to prevent the other party from retreating when they saw that the situation wasn't right, all of this was done extremely quickly in an instant. Then, Diwu shouted softly, "Go! Kill!" The flag on the mountain top waved and pointed forward. 8 groups of people shot out like arrows leaving the bow. They were like 8 long swords that could take one's life or soul, surging with murderous intent. On the opposite side, Li Chunbu's countenance changed drastically as he shouted furiously, "Xiao Qinyu! What is this? How is this a battle formation? How is this a fair battle?" With this kind of momentum, even people who didn't understand Xian cultivation could see that the 8,000 people on this side and the 8,000 people on the other side weren't on the same level. On one hand, primary school students were sent to participate in the battle. On the other hand, they had directly mobilized the regular army. That was the difference. The difference in strength was like heaven and earth. Xiao Qinyu looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. "Chunbua, my good brother! Actually, there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. The reason why you've fallen to your current state is because you pursue fairness in everything. But you don't know what fairness is? Fairness. There is no such thing as fairness in this world." Xiao Qingyu's wild laughter reverberated between heaven and earth. "Fairness has never existed since the beginning of the world. The sky will always be the sky, and the earth will always be the earth. If we really want to be fair, then shouldn't the heavens and earth also need to swap places every once in a while? Why has it never happened before? Ever since people appeared, there has been even less true fairness. Both are born after 10 months of pregnancy, but some are born in noble families while others can only be born in the thatched huts of beggars. Is this fair? Who do you ask for fairness from? Some are born smart and wise while others are born stupid. Who do you ask for fairness from? In these hundreds of thousands of years, more than billions of innocent people have died in the hands of experts. Who do these people want to ask for fairness from?" Xiao Qinyu burst into laughter. "Now my army is coming with an unstoppable momentum. Their strength is dozens of times more than yours. How can there be any fairness in a battle of life and death?" Li Chunbu trembled all over. Good! 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 Since that's the case, then why do I still pursue fairness? Since I'm going to destroy my family and clan no matter what, I'll just wait and see." The reason why Li Chunbu shouted that it was unfair earlier was actually because of Mo Tianji's instructions. The purpose of Li Chunbu's act was naturally to numb the enemy so that they wouldn't see through his true intentions. However, Xiao Qinyu's talk of fairness made Li Chunbu's heart as cold as dead ashes. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the 8 troops of the allied forces had already arrived in front of the Li clan's formation. On the top of the mountain, Mo Tianji stood with his hands behind his back. His expression was calm and emotionless as he watched the ant-like crowd below approach. The conversation between Li Chunbu and Xiao Qinyu reverberated in his ears, but it was as if he didn't hear a single word. It was only when Li Chunbu finished his last sentence that Mo Tianji's lips curled into a cold smile. He murmured, "That's right. How can there be true fairness in this world? Diwu Qingru, you have never thought of fairness. I, Mo Tianji, have never thought of it either. Since all of you yearn for unfairness and intend to achieve things through unfairness, then I'll give you unfairness." Chu Lur was a little puzzled. She asked, "Big brother Mo, I see that the other party is fully prepared. Aren't those people on our side sending themselves to their deaths? How are you going to give them unfairness?" Mo Tianji's lips curled into a cold smile. He looked down without blinking. He said, "They're not sending themselves to their deaths. Their purpose in coming here is only to perish together with us. This formation is an extremely extravagant bait. It's also an extremely realistic bait. And Diwu Qingru has already swallowed this bait. According to fairness, it's only fair that a 4th-grade martial saint dies at the hands of a 2nd-grade martial saint. After all, the other party has enjoyed more resources than him and has gone through hundreds of years of cultivation more than him. But now, it's all in one pot. What's the point of going to the netherworld together?" and Mo Tianji looked at the 8 troops of the other party. As expected, they didn't attack the formation from the front. Instead, they entered through the 8 doors. The cold smile on his lips became even more cruel. You didn't intend to fight with me in terms of formations. Actually, I didn't intend to either. Just as Xiao Qingyu said, your actual strength is dozens of times greater than ours. Why should I fight with you in terms of formations? Why talk about fairness? You wanted to destroy us easily, but you didn't expect that I wouldn't even give you the chance to do so. Because there was no battle here at all. There were only explosions. Diwu Qingru looked at the 8 troops of the other party. They didn't forcefully break through the outer formation. Instead, they followed his instructions and entered the foggy land of the heaven-annihilating divine formation in an orderly manner. His eyes flashed with calmness. Once they entered, it was equivalent to the end of the battle. He seemed to have tasted the results of the first battle. It was just that it wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. Because it seemed a little too simple. And Mo Tianji was ultimately too young. His thinking was too simple. He and Chu Yang were heroes. They hoped to use the actions of heroes to demand of the enemy. However, they neglected the enemy's characteristics. I, Diwu Qingru, have never been a hero. I am a formidable person. A formidable person who would do anything for the sake of victory. If they still couldn't win with such a huge disparity in strength, or even if they couldn't win completely, then all the over 8,000 experts who had entered would die of shame without waiting for others to say anything. After the 8,000 people in front of him were wiped out, the Li clan would only be left with high-end forces, the last of their forces. Then, the follow-up plan, just as Diwu Qingru started to consider the future battle situation, suddenly, Li Chunhuo's tragic voice came from the opposite side. Li Chunhuo's voice was like thunder in the sky, shaking the heavens and the earth. The majestic northwest will last for thousands of years. Wind blades and frost swords will bury the snow. The Li clan's spring and autumn has been generous since ancient times. Iron blood and strong aspirations will shake the northern fortress. Heroes will be everywhere. Bless my clan and its name will be passed down for generations. In today's battle, winds will come from all directions. Strong enemies will be oppressed, but iron bones will not grieve. I will return with you. I will be with you. At this moment, Li Chunhuo's voice was unusually heavy and solemn. As if he was mourning, his slow and solemn voice reverberated between heaven and earth for a long time. A tragic and stirring momentum, atmosphere, and aura rushed back and forth in the midst of the surrounding snowy mountains in broad daylight. 72 words. Every word was like a gem, sonorous and resonant. They spoke of the Li clan's glory and helplessness. They spoke of the Li clan's grievances, the Li clan's heroism and unyielding spirit. And the Li clan's determination. The determination to fight to the death. While his voice was still reverberating in the air, Diwu Qingru's expression had already changed. He shouted, "Attack immediately! Break the formation at full speed!" His voice became unusually sharp, and there was even a hint of panic in it. This wise man who had been through many battles seemed to have already sensed the arrival of an unknown danger, and knew what the other party was going to do. However, opposite him, Li Chunhua had already shouted fiercely at the same time. "The grandson of the Li clan, I will return with you." In the Gongmi Heaven Absolute Divine Formation, the voices of 8,000 people rang out tragically. "The grandson of the Li clan, I will return with you." With the tragic roar, all the Li clan members who had not participated in the battle, regardless of gender or age, dropped to their knees at the same time, sobbing uncontrollably. Those of the Li clan who were supreme martial artists and above, led by Li Chunhua, bowed to the ground at the same time. They didn't get up for a long time. Right at this moment, boom! An unprecedentedly loud explosion suddenly rang out. 8,000 martial saints and 10 supreme martial artists self-destructed at the same time. The power of the explosion this time was practically earth-shattering. In fact, it was unprecedented and unparalleled. Although it was often said to be earth-shattering, it didn't really live up to its name. However, the explosion this time really lived up to its name. In fact, not only was it earth-shattering, it was also an unprecedentedly huge explosion. Xiao Qingyu, who was already at the peak of supreme martial artist, was actually shaken by the aftershocks of the explosion. He could only feel a roar in his head. At the position where the Gong Mi Heaven Absolute Divine Formation was previously, a huge black hole appeared, extending in all directions with crackling sounds. Under this clear and bright sky, many dark and sinister space cracks appeared like demonic snakes. The 8,000 brothers of the Li clan and the 8,000 experts of the allied forces who had just entered were all annihilated at the same time. A huge mushroom cloud rose into the sky. From small to large, it soared high into the sky and spread out. Countless broken limbs and body parts were turned into debris and shot out in all directions. Rumble. Chapter 15:13. The nearby mountains and those that were nearby directly collapsed. The foundation of the entire mountain started to shake. Amidst the avalanche, the large rocks on the mountain jumped up as if they were alive. Then, like dumplings, they fell down and the mountain collapsed. Rumble! Thousands of feet of snow on the entire land jumped up and down along with the explosion. As the mushroom cloud rose, clouds of snow and dust that were thousands of feet thick also rose up. In this instant, it was as if many more pillars had been added to the northwest. Diwu Qingru was violently shaken. His face was pale. He felt that the mountain under his feet was collapsing. He hurriedly took preventive measures. Beside him, countless people rolled on the ground like gourds. They couldn't stand properly at all. Golden bells rang in their ears. In that instant, everyone lost their hearing at the same time. Diwu Qingru secretly cried out in his heart that he had miscalculated. As a wise man, he had instantly figured out the true meaning of Emotianji's plan. He didn't expect the other party to be so ruthless. The lives of 8,000 experts turned into an earth-shattering sound in an instant. This ruthlessness, this decisiveness, this boldness of a warrior cutting his wrist. This was truly a huge move. And those 100 million purple crystals. The effect of those purple crystals was actually not to defend against the outside but to restrain the power of the explosion. All the power was restrained and confined within the formation. If not for that, the range of the explosion would definitely not have been limited to this. But it was also because of this that the power of the explosion this time was extremely concentrated. The effect it created was naturally extremely terrifying. The flesh, blood, and essence of 8,000 saints and 10 supremes exploded at the same time. This in itself was already so powerful that it could shake the heavens and earth. Moreover, there was also the 100 million purple crystals that Emotianji had set up. 100 million purple crystals had increased the power of this explosion by tenfold. Of the 8,000 enemies who had already entered the formation, there would definitely not be a single person who would survive. Even if an expert like Wu Jueqing was inside, he would definitely die in today's situation. There had never been such a situation before and it might not be replicated in the future. Because today was already a great example. No one would fall into the same trap again. Today's situation was unprecedented. At this moment, Diwu Qingru finally completely understood Emotianji's plan. Why did he have to forcefully change the terrain and set up a formation in front of the enemy's eyes? Why did he have to use such low-end battle power as the first line of troops? More importantly, why did he have to arrange the Gong Mi Heaven Annihilating Divine Formation on the side closer to the allied forces? All of these were mere illusions. That kind of fierceness of a battle to the death was also very impressive. 100 million purple crystals was an even more powerful bait. The purpose of these low-end fighting forces was to perish together with the enemy, to use all of their life force to launch the most terrifying attack. Following this huge explosion, the impact spread far and wide. The Allied army's camp was sent flying into the air at almost the same time. Countless men and horses were knocked to the ground, and many of them were bleeding from their 7 orifices, suffering from internal injuries. In addition, countless mountains collapsed and the earth cracked, rolling down. At this moment, the area around the explosion was like the end of the world. The reason for this glorious victory included the lives of 8,000 people who fought without hesitation, billions of purple crystals, and most importantly, Mo Tianji's ingenious calculations and meticulous arrangements that saw through people's hearts. If the commander of the Allied forces wasn't Diwu Qingru, he might not have recognized that the formation was the Gongmi heaven-annihilating divine formation. If Diwu Qingru didn't understand the Gongmi heaven-annihilating divine formation and knew that this formation couldn't be broken by brute force, the Allied forces wouldn't have chosen to evade the important and dwell on the trivial. After entering the formation, they didn't immediately attack the people inside, giving the people guarding the formation too much time and opportunity to attack. In a sense, this result was the result of Diwu Qingru's full cooperation, and also the result of Mo Tianji's scheme against Diwu Qingru. Using the methods of an absolute expert to deceive an absolute expert. Mo Tianji's plan this time could be said to be a big deal, a big spirit, and a big scheme. Without any of these, he wouldn't have achieved this result. Regarding this situation, Diwu Qingru, who understood everything, didn't feel defeated. He only felt admiration. Diwu Qingru had been calculating all his life, and it was rare for him to be calculated by others. Now that he had done so, he only had admiration in his heart. Such a wise man was indeed worthy of respect. Even if it was an enemy, there would be no exception. A long time after the explosion, the heaven and earth were still trembling non-stop. Light smoke was rising everywhere. There were sounds of mountains and tsunamis all around. On the ground, a huge pit seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. It covered an area of thousands of feet and was bottomless. The lives of a total of 8,000 warriors had turned into an earth-shattering explosion at this moment. They already knew that their strength wouldn't be of much use in this final battle. They wouldn't even have the chance to attack when facing the enemy. They would be slaughtered. But when Mo Tianji proposed this plan to die together with them, no one hesitated. In this battle, their status was absolutely weak, but they ultimately played an unprecedentedly huge role. In the last 10 days, these people didn't go out. They just quietly stayed in their own homes to reunite with their loved ones. It didn't matter how rude, unreasonable, irritable, or heartless he was in the past, or if his wives and concubines were stolen or defrauded, or if he was originally kind and stood aloof from worldly affairs, or if he was originally a person who enjoyed the company of others. Everyone had miraculously behaved exactly the same in these 10 days. They just waited quietly. They didn't practice martial arts, didn't drink, didn't do anything. They just watched and accompanied their family members tenderly and reluctantly. They did those trivial things with them that they used to disdain, and talked about those family affairs. Even if they were usually irritable, they had never been so quiet in these 10 days. Li Hong's wife was the daughter of the head of the Li clan's enemy force. He was the one who killed his wife's entire family. But because he coveted his wife's beauty, he snatched her back and forced her to be his wife. The couple spent their lives in a cold war, but in these 10 days, Li Hong just quietly accompanied his wife, smiling gently. Every day, he cooked for the whole family with his clumsy culinary skills. When someone complained that the food was bad, he chuckled. Every night, he actually washed his wife's feet very carefully and gently. It was just that he still didn't say a word of apology. What happened back then wasn't something that could be resolved with just a word of apology. He just expressed his final feelings. Li Qingyun, this collateral descendant of the Li clan, naturally didn't have high cultivation achievements due to his poor aptitude. Usually, he would complain from time to time that the clan didn't give him any resources. He could be said to be the biggest thorn in the Li clan, the most difficult troublemaker to deal with. Even Li Wubwa and the others would feel a headache whenever they saw him. But in these 10 days, the thing that this troublemaker did the most was kowtow. He kowtowed to his ancestors. My surname is Li. Li Qinggong, who was less than 40 years old this year, was already a 4th-grade martial saint. He had always felt that he was a genius, a rare genius. His usual personality was naturally arrogant and domineering. He was even more domineering in the clan and had bullied many people. But in these 10 days, he greeted everyone he met with a smile. His attitude was almost humble as he sincerely begged for others' forgiveness. As long as the other party said, "It's all right now," or "I forgive you," he would immediately be full of smiles. Before he died, all his debts had to be cleared. Leon had always been the most arrogant and unruly. Because his father tried to discipline him, he once got into a fight with his father and eventually broke his father's arm. But in these 10 days, the thing that he did the most was to massage his old father's broken arm and his whole body. In the morning and at night, he would greet his father in the morning and at night. In the afternoon, he would help his father out for a walk. His old father was old and his nose was flowing. He would often wipe his nose on Leon when he tilted his head. Leon smiled gently and used his white robe to wipe his father's nose. He even lowered his head and tasted his old father's nose with his tongue when no one else could see. At that moment, his eyes were filled with tears. His father raised him. He still remembered that his father was as strong as a mountain when he was young. Now, he didn't even know how to wipe his own nose. But he actually didn't pay attention to it, and even broke his father's arm. How unfilial! How utterly devoid of conscience! There was no need to apologize. There was only action. I was wrong. But I don't have time. If there is a next life, I still want to be your son to make up for the mistakes in this life. There were many more. There were also some young men who had just gotten married. The young couple was inseparable for 10 days. This situation lasted until the night of the first day. These 8,000 people gathered together in the ancestral hall of the Lee clan. Without a word, they knelt down and kowtowed silently. That kind of scene was shocking, heartbreaking, and tearful. However, not a single one of the 8,000 people cried. There was only determination and tenacity. After 3 kowtows, they walked out proudly. The time for the final battle had arrived. Not a single one of the 8,000 people was missing. All of them appeared and lined up neatly, their expressions calm. Behind them, the doors of the 8,000 families were wide open. The families leaned against the doors and looked at each other, sending each other off with red makeup. Tears streamed down their faces silently. However, none of the 8,000 people turned back. The brothers of the Lee clan, together in death. Under the bows of their ancestors, from the first generation clans Lee Chunbua, the 8,000 people ended their lives in the most shocking way possible. They turned into dust just like that. Together with the 8,000 enemies who were much, much stronger than them, they turned into smoke at the same time and turned into a loud explosion. At the end of an instant, they turned into smoke. The love and hatred of the past, the lofty aspirations of the past, the sins of the past, everything became a thing of the past. Lee Chunbua straightened up, tears streaming down his face. Chapter 15-14. Lee Chunbua and Li Xiangxi heaved a long sigh at the same time. They had nothing to say. They couldn't help but lament in their hearts. Why didn't anyone tell us this in the past? If we had followed this advice, the Lee clan wouldn't have been wiped out today. We could have continued to prosper for 10,000 years, many tens of thousands of years. They valued martial prowess but neglected their roots. In the face of life and death, even a coward can transform into a warrior. A warrior will also be afraid of death. A despicable person may not necessarily be unable to face difficulties generously. A righteous person will also seek comfort. No one can clearly describe the change in an instant. It could be sublimation or degeneration. At the side, Chulur said slowly, "Therefore, there's really nothing to sigh about. There's only pride. Because after all, they didn't choose to live an ignoble life and be afraid of death. Among these people, I only respect those who are usually very kind and righteous. Because they are worthy of my respect. But the others," Chulur sneered and said, "Previously, I've also heard you guys talk about how some of these people conduct themselves. Many of them aren't open and above board, nor are they righteous. 10 days before their deaths, they all repented, so it's worth being moved by them. But what's worth thinking about is, why must they only repent right before their deaths? Why must they only realize their own foolishness and loss when there's no way out at all? How can a mere 10 days of repentance make up for a lifetime of harm? What have they done in the past? If that's the case, then can I assume that if they didn't have the pressure of life and death this time, and were faced with certain death, then perhaps these people wouldn't repent for their entire lives, and might not even repent even after death? Chule's cold voice reverberated in the air. Everyone, including Mo Tianji, was stunned. Yes, Chule's words were very heartless and cold. They were even very cold-blooded and pierced the heart. But they hit the nail on the head and pointed out the crux of the problem. At a time when people's hearts were most easily softened and moved, Chule maintained a high level of clarity. Even though she was an outsider, it was still extremely rare. Although this clarity, calmness, coldness, and was almost cold-blooded and cruel. But in this world, there were very few people who could do and think of such cruelty. Chule had a rough childhood and was plagued with illness. Every night was like crossing the door of life and death 100 times. This also created Chule's unique personality. What she treasured the most was what she had now. No matter how good it was, Chule wouldn't be tempted by anything that couldn't be in her hands now. They wouldn't take it seriously. Chule said lightly. There are all kinds of honors after death. It's better to live with a little filial piety. Mo Tianji said. Lure's words are a little extreme. To be able to repent at the last moment, it's also because she found her conscience. Chule said coldly. Is that so? I am not used to this kind of behavior of people who only repent when they are on the brink of death. Instead, I feel that it is better for these people to die after they repent. His family didn't feel too bad when he died, because he deserved to die. So, they just sighed a few times and let it go. Unfortunately, he had done evil for a generation, but he repented before he died, leaving his family with eternal sadness. That's why I don't agree. Chule's pretty brows were cold as she said. If it were me, I'd rather die a worse death than let my family be sad after my death. Mo Tianji was greatly surprised at once. He didn't expect Chule to say something like this. Although it was a little extreme, it was definitely reasonable. Moreover, it should be something that an old person who had been through life and death for a long time could say. But how old was Chule? Why did she have such thoughts? Chule said, The dead are gone. She glanced at Mo Tianji. Mo Tianji was shocked and immediately realized something. He looked deeply at Chule and said, Yes, now is not the appropriate time to sigh. Inform the army to retreat at full speed immediately. Retreat at full speed? Li Chunhua's tears hadn't dried yet. He looked at Mo Tianji with some astonishment. Mo Tianji had gathered all the people who were participating in the battle here and assumed a posture of cutting off all means of retreat. Now that they had the upper hand, they should pursue the victory. Why did they have to retreat instead? Or retreat at full speed immediately? What kind of explanation was this? Our final battlefield can't be here. We'll suffer a big loss here. Mo Tianji insipidly said. Our battlefield should be 500 kilometers behind. That place is surrounded by mountains. The mountain ranges are stacked on top of each other. That's our greatest geographical advantage. Then why did you come here and rush back? The reason why I assumed such a posture is naturally to lure Diwu Qingru into my trap. If not, with Diwu Qingru's intelligence, why would he send those 8,000 experts into the formation? Mo Tianji said indifferently. Now that 8,000 of them have been turned into ashes. Our greatest goal has been achieved. Of course, we have to retreat and retreat at the fastest speed possible. Just as Xiao Qingyu said, there is no such thing as fairness in this world. Fairness is something that only the strong can have. Diwu Qingru's side couldn't see through my plan and thus fell into the trap. Then, it is only natural for them to suffer losses. Now that the other side is in chaos, if we rush over to fight at this time, even if we can't win. Li Xiangxi looked at the chaos on the other side and was a little tempted. By the time we rush over, we will have fallen into Diwu Qingru's trap. Mo Tianji coldly said. The other side has indeed lost 8,000 men. But these 8,000 men are only low-end forces to the other side. The other side's high-end forces haven't been damaged at all. Moreover, they're filled with shame and anger. They're in a state of mourning. Are we going to throw our lives away if we go over? If you are willing, you can go ahead and court death. I will not stop you. These words could be said to be extremely rude. Li Xiangxi's face turned red. Since that's the case, as the military advisor wishes, retreat at full speed. Li Chunbua made a prompt decision and gave the order at once. When all the Li clan members received the order, none of them moved immediately. Instead, they all looked at the deep pit in the ground in unison. As they stared, it was as if they could see the 8,000 brothers entering the formation without any hesitation and hear that heroic cry. Brothers of the Li clan, together we return to the same place. Everyone stared deeply. Finally, they turned back decisively and quickly retreated with the army. On the battlefield, a huge pit was in sight. After tens of thousands of years, this place had become a natural ice lake. Despite the vicissitudes of life, its appearance remained unchanged. It was known as the return to the same lake. On the opposite side, in this place where the world was shaking violently, Diwu Qigru kept looking at the opposite side, anticipating the other party's next move. Mo Tianji, this is a heaven-sent opportunity for you. As long as you charge over, the results of the battle will definitely be even more glorious. Will you charge over? Can you resist the urge to charge over? As long as you charge over, I will definitely teach you an unforgettable lesson. I will return the defeat that I just received back to you. After a long time, there was no movement from the opposite side. Diwu Qingru sighed softly. Looks like this rare defeat will have to stay with me for the time being. The other party must have already retreated. Obviously, the other party's purpose so far was only to take advantage of him this once. Now that he had taken advantage of him, he would stop while he was ahead. He would definitely not be greedy and advance prematurely. This was indeed not the battlefield for the final battle. And Mo Tianji was obviously not someone who was greedy for small gains. A faint sense of admiration rose in Diwu Qingru's heart. This time, he had indeed been fully schemed against by the other party. But he was completely convinced by the other party's scheme. The other party had actually thought of such a tragic and desperate plan. He had even calculated every detail of a person's heart. The setup was superb. It was absolutely reasonable that he had lost this round. Despicable and shameless. Really too despicable. Beside him, a middle-grade supreme martial artist spat out the sand and mud in his mouth. He cursed furiously. How can such a despicable method be considered heroic? They actually exchanged such a small amount of strength for 8,000 of our experts. A total of 8,000 people were cheated just like that. Another supreme martial artist also cried out in grief and indignation. They said that they would fight the final battle here, but they slipped away like a rabbit. Going back on their words, what kind of strategists are they? They are more like gutless bandits. Another person's eyes reddened. At this moment, the allied forces were all agitated. Shut up! All of you, shut up! Diwu Qingru slowly stood up. At this moment, the tremors on the mountain had gradually subsided. He looked coldly at the supreme martial artists in front of him. What exactly is the other party despicable and shameless? This is the final battle. This is a place where life and death are at stake. This is the most suitable place for despicable and shameless. What are you unhappy about? What are you barking about? Everyone was instantly speechless. They had never seen Diwu Qingru so angry before. You are allowed to take advantage of others? Not abide by the rules? Break the rules? But don't allow others to use tricks? What kind of mentality is this? Diwu Qingru said heavily. With such mentality, even if there are another 1,000 or 10,000 battles, you will still lose. Even if you are lucky enough to win, it will be a dishonorable victory. What do you mean by cheated? We lost 8,000 people, but didn't the other party also lose 8,000 people? How is this cheated? A life for a life. If you die, you can only blame your own incompetence. What do you mean by blaming the enemy? Since they are the enemy, can you blame them? As for the final battle here, who agreed with you? Do you think that the final battle on the battlefield is a Jianghu duel? Ridiculous! Diwu Qingru said angrily. Everyone, get to your positions! What are you shouting for? All of you are impudent! This explosion is just the prelude to the final battle. This is just the beginning. During this period of time, Diwu Qingru's authority had been increasing day by day. The supreme martial artists were all silent out of fear. No one dared to refute him. Xiao Qingyu sighed and said, Commander-in-Chief Diwu is right. All of you have been too successful these years. Once there is a setback, you become like this. It will be difficult for you to achieve great things. However, Xiao Qinyu's words set the tone right away. They firmly supported Diwu Qingru. Chapter 15:15. Even Xiao Qinyu couldn't help but feel a lingering fear from the explosion just now. With such a scale of self-destruction, even if he, a peak-level supreme martial artist, was inside, he would probably be turned into a pile of minced meat. There might not even be a chance of survival. A wise man could kill a strong man. Therefore, Diwu Qingru had to fight with all his might here as well. If there were any obstacles in this battle, even if they could win, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Huge losses would be unavoidable, because the other party would definitely grab hold of any opportunity that could be used. Therefore, at this moment, he immediately expressed his stance and gave Diwu Qingru his full support. Indeed, after he said this, everyone looked at Diwu Qingru in a different light. Diwu Qingru took a deep breath and said, Immediately reorganize the army and pursue at full speed. If I'm not wrong, the real battleground is 1,000 miles ahead of us, in the boundless mountains. Everyone agreed in unison and went to reorganize the army. After a long while, there were still sporadic avalanches here and there, but everyone on their side had already climbed out. They stood neatly and moved forward. However, everyone's expressions were obviously not as relaxed as before the explosion. If Mo Tianji could cause such an accident once, if he could cause a second accident, would it be my turn? Under Mo Tianji's command, the Li clan's troops quickly retreated into the mountains with complicated terrain. Wu Jiuqing sighed a little. He never expected that Mo Tianji chose that place as his base with great fanfare. Other than taking advantage of the situation, he didn't achieve anything at all. In the end, it was just a feint. At this point, this battle has finally entered the right path. Chu Yan stood at the top of the mountain and sighed. Entering the right path is also approaching the end. The Li clan is one step closer to destruction. Mo Qingwu said. Although the Li clan had taken advantage of the situation just now, second brother probably doesn't feel too good about it. The battle was simply too tragic. So many brave men were reduced to ashes in just one night. Chu Yang silently pulled her into his arms, and softly said, Little Wu, you're wrong. Those 8,000 people died for a reason. The results of the battle that they brought had already far exceeded their value. They should be thanking Mo Tianji for being able to die so heroically. That's because their names will certainly go down in history, and their names will be passed down for eternity. Mo Lei said, Yes, from the way things are going, no matter what, they have to die. If they don't die heroically, they will only be slaughtered by the enemy like pigs and dogs. He died without any dignity or value. Now, it can be said that his death was worth it, and his death was glorious. Wu Jiuqing replied, Yes. Since I'm destined to die, to be able to die with honor is the greatest consolation for a man. Moreover, it can also reduce the enemy's morale. Dong Wushang had been silent all this while. At this moment, he opened his mouth and said indifferently, Well said, well said. Wu Jiuqing abruptly rolled his eyes. This little thing really doesn't know how to respect the elders. The tone of this sentence was like an elder praising a junior. How ridiculous. When I have the chance, I will definitely take good care of you and let you know why flowers are so red. It's about time. It's time for our side to make a move. Chu Yang chuckled softly. His sharp eyebrows suddenly rose slowly, and his eyes flashed with an inexplicable, strange look. Boss, you're not going to reveal yourself in this battle, are you? Dong Wushang could feel the aura on Chu Yang's body rising steadily. His eyes couldn't help but light up as he asked. Everyone turned to look at Chu Yang. The Tian clan really didn't think about this aspect. They didn't expect Dong Wushang, who was famous for being simple-minded, to be the first to raise this question. Now that they revealed themselves, their brothers were all at the level of second-grade supreme martial artists. If compared to the previous tribulations, they were indeed unprecedentedly strong. However, compared to the current high-end combat power of the continent, they weren't that outstanding. It could even be said that there were many dangers, and the danger was dozens of times higher. It was tantamount to placing oneself at the heart of the storm. The risk was too great. This was a major decision, and also a very dangerous one. Chu Yang grinned and said, Wushang is right. I have the same idea. This sort of calamity hasn't appeared in the open on this continent for tens of thousands of years. I want this number one divine weapon in the world to shine with its true brilliance today. Wu Jueqing was taken aback. He said, Chu Yang, I think it's better for you to consider this decision a little more before you make it. Revealing yourself now will only bring you harm but hardly any benefit. This is really not the right time. Wu Jueqing's words were definitely not alarmist. One must know that the Li clan was about to be destroyed, and the Lan clan was already finished. The power structure of the upper three heavens was bound to be redrawn. Because of the clash of interests, it was bound to cause conflict between the original powers. Chu Yang's faction should be waiting at ease for the exhausted, looking for opportunities to sow discord from both sides. When all the major powers were fighting, they could then sit back and reap the benefits. The tribulation this time was different from the previous tribulation sword masters. Because, without the support of the law enforcers, they had the addition of the law enforcers, their greatest enemy. Revealing himself now would instead cause the big clans to reunite. After all, the tribulation sword master was the biggest enemy of the big clans, their common enemy. Mo Leia and Mo Qingwu were also a little worried. Although they also believed in Chu Yang's ability, the difference in strength between them and the enemy was too great. The Li clan was an excellent example. In the face of absolute strength, no matter how ingenious the plan was or how unshakable the will was, it was impossible to deal with it. Only the fist was the absolute truth. To be honest, I didn't want to reveal myself so early either. Chu Yang smiled and said, My original plan was to reveal my identity when all of my brothers reached the level of second-grade supreme martial artist. That way, I could intimidate and dominate the world. But now, I can't hide any longer. Time is not on my side. Wu Jueqing's heart skipped a beat. He understood and said, Is it because of that black aura? The extraterrestrial demon? Chu Yang nodded solemnly and said, No, it's because of the extraterrestrial demons. Their traces have appeared in the heavens. I have no other choice. If I continue to hide and secretly increase the strength of my side, then this continent will definitely fall into disputes and internal strife until the end. If I completely ignore it, when we finally unify the heavens, the number of experts who will be able to survive in the end will probably not exceed the current number of 11. If there wasn't this hidden danger of the extraterrestrial demons, I wouldn't care how many people would die. But now, the extraterrestrial demons have already been confirmed. I don't know why they have come down, whether it's voluntary or forced, or whether it's a coincidence, but the fact is that the extraterrestrial demons already exist in this world. And with our current strength, we can't match them at all. The extraterrestrial demons are the common enemy of all of us. This cannot be denied, and no one can deny it. If when the strong enemy arrives, everyone still can't unite against the outside world, I'm afraid. Before our brother Jia unifies the heavens, this world would have already become a base for the extraterrestrial demons. Wu Jueqing frowned and said, This may be a little overthinking. That aura that came down that day may not necessarily be the real body of the extraterrestrial demon, right? Chu Yang shook his head and said solemnly, Elder Wu, aren't you deceiving yourself? The Dharma Supreme has the aura of the extraterrestrial demon. Even if the Dharma Supreme's cultivation isn't the best in the world today, he can at least be in the top 5, right? But how strong is the aura of the extraterrestrial demon on him? It's completely incomparable. Not to mention Yizui of the Yi clan. And the aura that came down that day almost covered the entire world. How powerful is that? If such an aura is only a fragment of the extraterrestrial demon, or some weapon that broke through time and space and came here, I definitely won't believe it. Therefore, the extraterrestrial demons must have come. This is no longer something we can deny. If we don't handle it well, the entire heavens continent, be it the upper 3 heavens, the lower 3 heavens, or the upper 3 heavens, will definitely be poisoned. I, Chu Yang, may not be a benevolent person with lofty ideals, but there are too many kind and innocent people in this world. Even if we can protect ourselves, how can we bear to see everyone in the world become food for the extraterrestrial demons? Chu Yang smiled warmly. Besides, there are still our families and many people we care about. But as long as the Tribulation Sword Master appears, then a core will naturally be formed. When that time comes, if the great clans can make the decision to fight the extraterrestrial demons, then I don't necessarily have to exterminate all the great clans. The fate of the great clans can be destroyed by the Tribulation Sword Master, but it can also be rewritten by him. That's it. Difficult. Wu Jueqing shook his head vigorously. I can only describe this idea of yours as whimsical. The great clans regard the fate of tribulation very highly. Back then, my brothers and I also encountered such a situation. At that time, we didn't want to kill too much, but the great clans definitely won't let you off just because you're soft-hearted. All kinds of schemes, all kinds of despicable means are endless. I'm only asking you, if you really expose yourself and they still want to deal with you, what will you do? When that time comes, what will you do? Wu Jueqing asked. The main reason I exposed myself is to deal with the extraterrestrial demons. This part must be made clear. If they still treat me as the number 1 enemy after I explain the danger, then I will kill them all and completely exterminate the 2 clan. I won't feel the slightest bit of guilt. Those who still want to fight among themselves at such a time, what's the pity in killing them? Chu Yang smiled lightly. Besides, the great clans aren't the only martial artists in this world. There are countless people outside the great clans, and these people are also a force. A force that cannot be ignored. Chapter 15-16. It's my duty to do so. Chu Yang chuckled and said, Of course, if we still can't turn the tide in the end, what's wrong with perishing together with this continent? That's what I deserve. I'm the Tribulation Sword Master. This is also my responsibility. How can I back down? Mo Qingwu's face was flushed. She looked at Chu Yang, her eyes full of love. Mo Qingwu, who had never felt that the words Tribulation Sword Master were adorable and respectable in her previous life, finally understood something today. At this moment of enlightenment, some of the grudges that still existed in her heart suddenly dissipated like a cool breeze, without a trace or shadow. Mo Layer also held her breath. Dong Wushang jumped up and laughed. That's right, this is my boss. What's the big deal about death? As a man, I naturally have to do what I'm supposed to do. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Part 7 Chapter 8-13. 3 Light Formation. If you don't do it because of this or that, then you are a coward. I, Dong Wushang, will of course accompany boss and fight until the world turns upside down. Wu Jueqing took a deep breath. Respect flashed across his eyes. He said, Since that's the case, I'm not someone who's afraid of trouble. I can also fight a battle with the extraterrestrial demons in the Heavens continent. It'll be the first battle where I meet my brother again. Chu Yang laughed and said, There's no need to be too pessimistic. Maybe things aren't as serious as we think. Once the pros and cons are clear, several big clans will immediately change sides and work together to fight against the extraterrestrial demons. It's not impossible. In that case, after the extraterrestrial demons are killed, the order of the heavens will be re-established. Destroying the Dharma Supreme and taking over the law enforcement officers will be even more natural. Won't that be great? Everyone laughed bitterly. Everyone knew that Chu Yang was just pretending to be relaxed when he said this. He definitely didn't think so in his heart. If everything in the world was so simple, and everyone was so clear about love and hate, with the interests of the common people as the main premise, then where would there be injustice? That kind of world was too cute, too fascinating for him to imagine. Wu Jiuqing was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Extraterrestrial demons, extraterrestrial demons." His eyes suddenly shone brightly as he muttered, "Send my brother to battle the extraterrestrial demons in the outer realm. Protect my brother to become an immortal golden body. Extraterrestrial demon! It's all because of the Sky Fiend." He thought of his big brother's sacrifice and the tragic deaths of the past masters of Calamity Sword. Then, he thought of Chu Yang's choice. He couldn't help but murmur, "Calamity Sword Master against the Heavenly Demon!" The people from the Li clan retreated into the mountains like the tide. He kept retreating. Under Mo Tianji's command, countless purple lights suddenly flashed. The entire sky seemed to be illuminated by these rising purple lights. Streaks of energy appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, the entire area was filled with mist. More than half of the Li clan's 10,000 years' worth of purple crystals were scattered here by Mo Tianji. Whether or not it was a waste was another matter. In any case, the effect was Ao Shiyun's name. This whole thing was a mess. The Alliance army that was about to give chase was also dazzled by this matter. Fearing that the enemy had some kind of scheme, they uniformly slowed down their speed. In front of them, streaks of purple light shot into the sky. Then, they quickly disappeared and merged into the mountains that had stood tall for hundreds of thousands of years. The power of the previous explosion was shocking. The Alliance army suffered heavy losses, but because the explosion point was too close, the other areas were naturally much less affected. Even so, the area within a radius of a few thousand miles was still affected by the tremors. The area where the purple lights flashed was relatively far from the explosion point. Although much of the snow on the mountains was still shaken off, some of the relatively shallow ravines were completely flattened. Coupled with the thousands of years of accumulated snow, it was really unknown how deep the ravines were. However, although the mountain itself was affected by the tremors, there was no danger of it collapsing. The purpose of these streaks of purple light was unknown. Purely looking at it, it seemed to be used to stabilize the mountain. The moment the purple light entered the mountain, not a single speck of dust fell off the mountain. It stood tall and upright. Could it be that the power of so many purple crystals was used just to stabilize the mountain? Wasn't this too extravagant? This was simply an act of squandering. After the Li clan's men entered the mountains, they collectively disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Diwu Qingrou's men came after them. They were also careful and did not act rashly. After occupying the outermost mountain and setting up camp at the top of the mountain, Diwu Qingrou passed down an order for the entire team to stop moving forward and not act rashly. In some places ahead, there were still streaks of purple light rising continuously, rushing up and disappearing. Diwu Qingrou looked ahead, his face full of heaviness. This is really too extravagant. Previously it was 100 million purple crystals. This time, the other party has scattered at least 1 billion purple crystals. Xiao Qingyu murmured. Could it be another array formation? Do they want to perish together with us? If that's really the case, I'm afraid the power is even greater than the previous one. The previous explosion was unprecedentedly powerful. Even this peak-level supreme martial artist was terrified. Now that he saw the purple crystals that were far more powerful than before, it was not surprising that he was a little nervous. 1 billion purple crystals, even any of the 8 superclans could not come up with this amount. Unless they worked together to clear the warehouse, they could only barely come up with it. If this number was purely calculated, it would be enough to pile up 100 mid-level supreme martial artists. But he did not know what psychology the Li clan had to accumulate so many purple crystals. In a battle between wise men of the same level, The same trick will not work twice. I understand this principle, and I believe Mo understands it too, Diwu Qingru said. The purpose of these purple crystals is indeed to set up an array, but not to perish together. Instead, it's to stabilize the terrain so that not a single blade of grass, tree, mountain, or rock can be easily shaken. After this formation is completed, even a mid-grade supreme martial artist wouldn't be able to move a single rock on this mountain with his full strength. What? You mean? Yi Xiaoyao was confused. Spending 1 billion purple crystals just to stabilize the structure of the mountains and not destroy it. What is this, isn't this? Yi Xiaoyao did not finish his words, but everyone understood the latter half of his sentence. This was simply the act of a super prodigal. More than 1 billion purple crystals were thrown away just like that. The only purpose was to prevent the mountains from being destroyed. This was simply a way of doing things that made people speechless. If they were thrown into the water, they could still make a sound. What could they do here? Seniors, if you think this way, you are very wrong. Deep fear appeared in Diwu Qingru's eyes. I mentioned before that this is the main battlefield that Mo chose. It is also the final battlefield between the enemy and us. Here, mountains are connected, mountains cover mountains. The terrain is extremely complicated. It is precisely such a special geographical environment that made Mo choose this place. And the scattering of these purple crystals also proves this point. The Li clan has lived in the northwest for many years. This is their most fundamental base camp. I believe that even if the Li clan were to walk with their eyes closed, they would not make a mistake in this mountain range. But we are new here, so we know nothing about this terrain. There are 3 key elements in a decisive battle. The enemy and us have the advantage. If the Li clan wants to fight against us, the only thing they can rely on is the geographical advantage. To be honest, in my original plan, at the beginning of the battle, I would gather the strongest experts on our side and work together to destroy the terrain here so that the enemy would no longer be familiar with it. But with Mo generosity, these more than 1 billion purple crystals, he completely grasped the geographical advantage in one fell swoop. With this geographical advantage, they can make full use of it. With their weak forces against our strong forces, they can cause damage that is several times more than ours. Although we still have the advantage in this battle, it is already impossible for us to turn our advantage into victory in a short time and easily defeat the Li clan. This is the power of more than 1 billion purple crystals. Diwu Qingru sighed deeply. The ability of a supreme martial artist could move mountains and fill seas. They could also shatter the void. This ability could bring about infinite changes in the established pattern of war. Diwu Qingru indeed intended to send high-level supreme martial artists to wantonly destroy the terrain that the other party relied on the moment they arrived here. As long as 2 supreme martial artists casually fought, each swinging a huge mountain and bombarding it for a while, most of the terrain here would be destroyed. The Li clan, which did not have the geographical advantage, could only choose to fight head-on. In that case, not only would there be no more suspense in this battle, it would also end in a very short time. But what he did not expect was that Mo had also thought of this step and could even devise such a powerful contingency plan, using more than 1 billion purple crystals to preserve the geographical advantage. Such generosity could no longer be described as simply astonishing. Even if Diwu Qingru were to ask himself, he would not be able to do such a thing. Because even if the 8 super clans and the law enforcement officers joined forces, they would definitely not take out so many purple crystals for him to squander. To use the wealth that could nurture 100 supreme martial artists to fight a battle, or even just to lay the foundation for this battle. This would have been unimaginable in anyone's eyes. However, Mo had done it without the slightest bit of forewarning. This was truly a great generosity. Diwu Qingru's face was as calm as ever, as if he had a card up his sleeve. But in his heart, there were many worries. Since Mo had made such a decision to cut off all means of retreat, that meant that he had 100% confidence in using the geographical advantage to win the battle. He had actually fallen into a passive position again. In the same battle, he had actually been schemed against twice by the enemy and had no way to counterattack at all. Such a feeling made Di Wuqingru feel unusually oppressed. It was as if whatever he wanted to do, the other party had already foreseen it one step ahead of him. This could not go on. If he just let the other party make the moves while he reacts passively, even if he could win this battle, he would have an inner demon. He had to think of a way to counterattack. But where should he counterattack? Looking at the rising purple light in front of him, Di Wuqingru frowned and pondered. What kind of battle formation is this? Why is the effect so amazing? It directly draws on the power of heaven and earth and blends it into the battle formation. It's really frightening. Xiao Qingyu asked. Everyone had the same question in their hearts. This is the Three Lights Great Formation. Chapter 15-17. Di Wuqingru looked at the sky and sighed. Its full name is Three Lights Cosmic Upside-Down Formation. No wonder. I was still wondering why Li Chunbo would be so unwise to completely disperse the dark clouds that had been in the sky for hundreds of thousands of years before the battle, even at the expense of his own source of life. So it was to complete this formation, so that's why. Xiao Qingyu had a bad feeling. He had contributed half of Li Chunbo's effort to disperse the dark clouds. In that case, his act of caring for his brother had actually become the true meaning of helping the enemy? Wasn't he being used by the other party without anyone noticing? And the depletion this time would eventually be turned around to deal with him. The moment he thought of this, Xiao Qingyu almost vomited blood. He had shot himself in the foot. If such a thing really happened to him, a mid-level supreme martial artist, then it would be a joke. This Shao clan ancestor almost gritted his teeth as he asked. What do you mean? The so-called Three Lights Universe Reversing Great Formation uses the power of the sun, moon, and stars to transform it into surging spiritual energy that enters the Great Formation. This makes it so that the place where the Great Formation is located will not move at all for 10,000 years. Of course, as this is the northwest where the sun, moon, and stars can't be seen all year round, the method of using manpower to disperse the dark clouds in the sky definitely won't last long. I believe that not long after, the dark clouds will definitely cover the northwest once again, and the power of the three lights will be cut off. This formation can only be maintained for another 3 years at most before it will be destroyed. Di Wuqingru sighed. But the result of this formation participating in this battle is already irreversible. I believe that if both parties are willing to fight, everything can be decided within a few days, definitely not 3 years, then. That day Xiao Qingyu was dumbfounded. Oh, Elder's idea has already come true. Previously, Li Chunbo's method of using up his life energy could only achieve half of the effect at most. If he were to set up the formation, I believe that the amount of purple crystals used wouldn't exceed 500 million, and the area covered by the formation would definitely be reduced sharply. If that was the case, we might still have a chance. But Elder Xiao, once you interfered in consideration of our old friendship, the blue sky became clear. The power of the three lights of the sun, moon, and stars shone down without reservation. It can be considered as completely helping the enemy. Di Wuqingru sighed and said, Now that the formation has been completed, it's futile to say anything else. And just as Di Wuqingru was explaining to the Alliance army, the purple crystals on the ground no longer shone. Then, the sky seemed to respond to something, and a blazing white light fell from the blazing sun in the sky. The sun of the purple cheese of the sun of the sun of sun, instantly, an abnormally hot aura burst. That enormous heat was hot enough to melt gold and stone. Di Wuqingru and the others were standing far away, but they could still feel that kind of heat that could burn pig iron. However, even the snow on the ground did not show any signs of melting under the blazing white sun. Then, from the opposite direction, an extremely cold white light slowly descended and intertwined with the blazing white light. It was the Qinghua moonlight. It was as if two gods with unparalleled power were fighting in the sky, one man and one sword fiercely clashing against each other. In another moment the sky was filled with spots of light again. Countless spots of light quickly filled the entire sky in the distance. Countless rays of cold starlight, like stars in a chessboard, gradually fell down densely and landed on the ground. The cold starlight was as thin as hair, but there were billions, tens of billions of rays. They had already covered the entire ground, not letting go of a single blade of grass, tree, stone, snow, ice, or dust. A soundless feeling of rupture suddenly arose. Then, the three lights disappeared completely in a trance. An 8th grade supreme martial artist didn't believe it and tried to pick up a fist-sized stone beside his feet. However, this 8th grade supreme martial artist used all his strength and still couldn't pick up the stone. Everyone woke up from their daze and went to do the experiment personally, but the result was the same. The only thing that could be picked up was the snow on the ground. However, the stones attached to the ground couldn't even be picked up, the finger-sized ones. Everything became one with the everlasting heaven and earth. This was the true meaning of being impregnable. Seeing all this happening right before his eyes, and thinking of what Diwu Qingru had said just now, Xiao Qinyu's old face turned purple at once. Under the combination of shame and anger, a strong feeling of being unable to show one's face rose. He panted heavily and his eyes turned red. I, Xiao Qinyu, actually used all my strength to help the enemy during the final battle? To deal with me and the team that I lead? This is the biggest joke in the world. Elder Xiao, please calm down. I think this is probably a Motianji's scheme and may not necessarily have anything to do with Li Chunhua. I even suspect that Li Chunhua may not even know that he, too, had been set up by Motianji that night. Diwu Qingru said indifferently. Motianji asked people to prepare a sufficient amount of purple crystals right from the start. Obviously, he had thought of this long ago. He even knew beforehand that at that time, Elder Xiao would definitely think that Elder Li's intentions were just to motivate the clansmen. And with Elder Xiao and Elder Li's 10,000 years of brotherhood, when Elder Li was in such despair, even willing to sacrifice his own life to fight under the sky, he would definitely help. So, he deliberately planned all of this. Diwu Qingru sighed and said, Motianji's ability to calculate people's thoughts is really terrifying. Everything is within Motianji's calculations, including the possible reactions on our side. This Motianji really lives up to his reputation as the master of calculation and manipulation. He's really amazing. It would have been better if he didn't say anything. Now that he said this, Xiao Qinyu, this old man, was even more ashamed. He was the dignified clan master of the Xiao clan, one of the few experts of the current generation, an old man who had lived for more than 10,000 years, but he was actually completely calculated by the other party and used as a tool. Moreover, this person was only a young boy in his teens or 20s. How could he endure this? Xiao Qinyu's eyes turned red. His clothes started to flutter even though there was no wind. His long hair also stood up. His eyes opened wide as he roared. Motianji, you're a junior. You've gone too far. This old man and you can't live under the same sky. Elder Xiao, please calm down. Diwu Qingru's eyes flickered as he said, If you think deeper, the enemy may be using this method to make you angry and lose your mind. You're the commander-in-chief of our army. If you let your emotions affect your decisions because of anger, they'll get more opportunities to strike back. In fact, Diwu Qingru didn't care whether the enemy had an opportunity to take advantage of him or not. But Xiao Qinyu was furious at this moment. When a supreme martial artist of this level was angry, it was really hard to estimate how much his battle strength would increase. Moreover, after his anger rose, that last bit of friendship would no longer be a hindrance to Xiao Qinyu. This was what Diwu Qingru wanted to see. Turning passivity into initiative, turning weakness into motivation. This was Diwu Qingru's method. When a wise man was at a disadvantage, he would use the most effective counterattack. Motianji has triggered the celestial phenomenon, and the three lights of the sun, moon, and stars have risen. It looks like the decisive battle is about to officially start. Diwu Qingru took a deep breath, but his expression was unusually calm. So what if I let you have the geographical advantage? I still have manpower. Manpower is the most important thing on the battlefield, especially in an army made up of super-strong martial artists who have the ability to move mountains and seas. I'd like to see what other treasures you have that can make up for this fundamental gap. If you can't make up for this gap in real strength, even if you have all kinds of other methods, you won't be able to change the final outcome. From this moment on, let you and I have a real battle. After a while, I can only command from the sky. Diwu Qingru said indifferently. Elder Lon and the senior from the law enforcement team, I'll have to trouble the two of you to help me command from the sky later. Lan Mofeng and the middle-grade supreme martial artist from the law enforcement team agreed at the same time. Faced with such a messy mountain range, even if one stood at the peak of the mountain, it would be difficult to see everything clearly. It was only by standing high up in the sky that one could really see 1,000 miles. Prepare for battle! Diwu Qingru ordered softly. These two words were filled with the most bloody taste. Everyone's heart trembled. Was it finally going to start? On the opposite side, Xiao Qinyu would never have thought that his righteous help back then would actually bring his own team into a predicament where they couldn't advance or retreat. Li Xiangxi laughed loudly, very pleased. Xiao Qinyu's expression must be very good now. It's a pity that we can't see it. If only we could see it, then it would be perfect. Li Chunhua frowned. What did you say? How impudent! Li Xiangxi shrank back. Yes, it's second Uncle Xiao. Li Xiangxi's age was actually already more than 10,000 years old, but he still feared his father's reprimand from the bottom of his heart. It was a kind of fear that originated from a father's nature. After all, there were very few people in this world who weren't afraid of aging. Li Chunhua said indifferently. No matter how hostile we are, the order of seniority must not be abolished. In today's situation, you can kill your second uncle with your own hands, or your second uncle will kill you with his own hands. This is understandable. On the battlefield, there's no such thing as kinship. But no matter what, you can't spout nonsense in terms of words and attitude. Is your second uncle's name something that you can call him directly to his face? Yes, father's reprimand is right. I'll remember it. Li Xiangxi was sweating profusely. Li Chunhua snorted. All these years I've been in seclusion all year round, and the entire clan has been managed by you. Now that things have come to this, you still have the cheek to mock others? Don't you feel embarrassed? Li Xiangxi's face was ashen, and he kept silent. Chapter 1520. There was only one thing that was certain. Diwu Qingru sent out these two teams mainly to test the waters. However, Mo Tianji sent out these two teams with a premeditated plan. Diwu Qingru watched the two teams enter the battle zone from high up in the sky. His face was calm and his mind entered an extremely detached state. No matter what the other party did, he could react immediately. This time, I won't give Mo Tianji the slightest chance to pull any tricks. From where he was, he could also see the traces of the Li clan team entering the battle zone. Both teams were moving forward at an extremely fast speed. They set off towards the place of life and death without hesitation. Although the distance was far, the people fighting on both sides were all experts of the world. Their speed was more than 1,000 times faster than ordinary people. The distance between the two sides was actually only 500 miles. The distance of a few hundred miles was about to collide with each other in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. However, Diwu Qingru firmly believed that Mo Tianji would not let the two sides fight openly. A head-on collision was equivalent to courting death. It was not something a wise man would do. What would this wise man do next? Diwu Qingru was not Mo Tianji. Naturally, he did not know what Mo Tianji would do. Therefore, he chose to wait. Wait for Mo Tianji's change. He would deal with it by remaining unchanged. In midair, Mo Tianji suddenly let out a long howl. Diwu Qingru looked over. The Li clan team had already entered a canyon where they were about to come into contact with the enemy. This canyon was quite long. Moreover, it faced the mountain peak on the Alliance's side. It was like a natural barrier. It actually completely blocked Di Wuqingruo's line of sight. At this moment, the Alliance's team was only a few hundred feet away from the other side of the mountain peak. Di Wuqingruo made a prompt decision and ordered, "Stop!" The Alliance's men stopped in their tracks. Each of them quickly found rocks to cover themselves. These rocks that could be shattered with one slap were now a solid barrier that no one could destroy. This was also the main reason why Di Wuqingruo was not worried that the terrain would give the enemy an advantage. You, Mo Tianji, created the terrain. We can also make use of it. You are not the only ones who will benefit. If low-level and high-level martial artists were to hold the same shield, the ones who would benefit the most would still be the high-level martial artists. It was as Di Wuqingruo had expected. After the Li clan's men entered the canyon, they disappeared without a trace. It was as if a drop of water had melted into the sea, completely silent. Commander-in-Chief Di Wu is indeed a master strategist. The other party has indeed stopped at that position. Lan Mofeng was sincerely convinced. Strategizing could determine the outcome of a battle from 1,000 miles away. This is not something that is hard to predict. Among all the mountains between the two sides, only that mountain ridge is the highest. Moreover, there are no openings to the left and right. Most importantly, that is the only place that can block my line of sight. No matter how high we are, we will not be able to see the situation clearly due to the distance. If we are any lower, we will not even be able to see our side clearly. Di Wuqingruo insipidly said. Therefore, that mountain ridge is the watershed. Mo Tianji did not hesitate to spend more than 1 billion purple crystals to activate the power of the 3 lights of the sun, moon, and stars to maintain the terrain. This was so that this command would not be wasted. Therefore, that mountain ridge is extremely heavy. Pass down the order. If the other party does not move, we will not move either. Mo Tianji hopes that we will take the initiative to attack, cross this mountain ridge, and fall into their trap and be at his mercy. But how can I do as he wishes? The order was passed down. In an instant, the battlefield was plunged into dead silence. There was not even a shadow on this side. No one knew where the Li clan's men had hidden themselves. On the other side, the experts of the allied forces were all holed up in the snow, not moving at all behind the rocks. It seemed like they did not even dare to breathe loudly. Mo Tianji smiled slightly and actually landed back very straightforwardly. He landed on the top of the mountain to rest. Almost at the same time that he moved, Di Wuqingruo also landed back. The two of them let out a long laugh, having a tacit understanding. In this battle, firstly, it was to see who could not keep their cool first. Secondly, it was time to start another scheme. Di Wuqingruo would definitely not continue to wait so foolishly, and neither would Mo Tianji. However, in the instant that the two of them landed, another 2 teams from the allied forces took advantage of the brief moment when Mo Tianji was not in the air to quietly rush past from the left and right. On the vast snowy plains, the 2 teams of martial artists in white robes. They were like 2 snow dragons rushing past at high speed. This move was Di Wuqingruo's probing move. No matter what choice Mo Tianji made, with this move as the foundation, he could attack or retreat. If Mo Tianji did not make a move, the second batch of people would join the first batch of people and launch a large-scale attack. They would definitely be able to destroy the first batch of people from the Li clan easily. If Mo Tianji had already planned and sent people to assist, the second batch of people could also help defend the first batch of people. At least, it would ensure that they would not be wiped out in one fell swoop. However, how could Mo Tianji not think of what Di Wuqingruo thought of? In fact, he would even think of things that Di Wuqingruo would not think of. At the same time, from the Li clan's side, 2 teams of people also attacked from both sides. The direction of their advance was actually the opposite direction of the 2 opposing teams. They set off almost at the same time, and their speed was also about the same. The current situation was very delicate. If the second batch of people from the allied forces went around first, then the first 2 teams from the Li clan would be trapped in a terrible situation of being attacked from all sides. At that time, no matter how powerful the ambush was, Diwu Qingru would choose to launch a direct attack. Once the opportunity was gone, they could only take it down first. If the four teams happened to meet, then what awaited the Li clan would still be a one-sided situation because of the difference in strength between the two sides. At this moment, Diwu Qingru and Mo Tianji's expressions were especially solemn. The official start of the decisive battle. The first confrontation had begun. After confirming that the second batch of people was halfway through their journey, Diwu Qingru waved his hand and two more teams silently surrounded them. The third batch of people started to move. They formed a pincer attack. On the Li clan's side, Mo Tianji did not make any move this time. Only the four teams at the very beginning remained motionless like a mountain. The rest of the teams were extremely calm. Mo Tianji rose up again and floated in midair with Chu Lur, still standing at his original position. This time, he held a few incomplete versions of heavy pills in his hand. It looked like he did not plan to continue until the battle was over. Today could be said to be Mo Tianji's day of extravagance. He spent so much money that he even had to use incomplete versions of heavy pills to recover his cultivation. What kind of wasteful behavior was this? The previous 100 million purple crystals, more than 1 billion purple crystals, and the vast 3 lights were ultimately just external resources. However, those incomplete versions of heavy pills were directly life-saving elixirs that could save almost any kind of injury. More than 1 billion purple crystals were enough to create 100 low-grade supreme martial artists. That was just a statistical statement. The actual situation might not be so. However, the incomplete version of the heavy pill was a super elixir that could truly save a low-grade supreme martial artist from dying injuries. Today, this elixir was used to restore Mo Tianji's depleted cultivation so that he could stay afloat for a long period of time. This could no longer be described as extravagant. On the opposite side, Diwu Qingru also rose into the air at almost the same time. If one did not know better, they would definitely think that the two of them had discussed this beforehand. Just as Mo Tianji rose into the air, a sudden change occurred. Just like that, the two groups of people from the Li clan disappeared into the vast snowfield in an extremely neat and abrupt manner. Just like the previous two groups of people, they disappeared without a trace. The people from the Li clan on the mountaintop also disappeared without a trace in an instant. They had completely disappeared. They had completely disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had really discussed this beforehand. On the other side, under Diwu Qingru's instructions, the 4 teams that had been sent out later also disappeared. The only traces that could be found were those of the previous 2 teams. They were still quietly lying on the surface of the snow. Those white robes lying on the snow were no easier to find than disappearing. The other 4 teams all silently dived into the snow. There was no such thing as disappearing without a trace in this world. It was just that the key to the so-called disappearing had not been seen through. The so-called disappearing of the 2 teams was nothing more than diving into the snow. The 3 lights' great formation could indeed fix the rocks and plants in place, and even turn them into substances that even peerless experts could not move. However, it could not fix the snow. The 4 teams, totaling more than 3,000 people, disappeared neatly under the snow. Obviously, they were preparing an ambush. The original snow on this terrain was already thousands of feet deep. After the earthquake and avalanche, it was even thicker. More than 3,000 people passed through the snow without any difficulty. Just looking at the surface of the snow, there was really no movement at all. Diwu Qingru watched quietly. The people on Mo Tianji's side had disappeared. They must have also hidden in the snow. Mo Tianji's arrangement should be just like that. But now, his own people had also gone down. The Li clan is known as the Icy Snow Clan and is naturally very familiar with hiding and fighting in the snow. However, the people on our side are not incompetent either. Most importantly, whether it is in terms of numbers or cultivation, our side is far superior. Even if we fight under the snow and are unfamiliar with the battle environment, we can still rely on our great strength to forcefully crush them. It is definitely foolproof. However, Diwu Qingru immediately discovered something strange. Although the opposite sides still had the same arrangement, and the flag was still erected, it seemed like something was missing. What exactly is missing? Diwu Qingru looked over. Because the distance was really too far, the flag on the opposite side was already as small as the eye of a needle. He couldn't help but ponder. However, he couldn't figure it out. Chapter 15:21. Upon hearing that, Lan Mofeng also focused his vision and looked over. Similarly, he didn't find anything. He said doubtfully, "Nothing is missing. Commander Diwu, what exactly are you looking for?" Diwu Qingru didn't answer. He focused on observing and sensing with his heart. After a while, he finally smiled. "So that's how it is. It actually lacks some human presence. Humans can be emboldened and also intimidating. I didn't find anything at all. However, the enemy's base camp has clearly become an empty city. Where are they? Where exactly did they go? If they weren't under the snow, could they have flown? Even if they really flew collectively, there should be a shadow, right? Also, did the first two teams that Emotianji sent out just give up like that?" Previously, Diwu Qingru had set up on the ground. Although he had sent out 4 teams and reckoned that the enemy would definitely have corresponding arrangements, he didn't see it with his own eyes after all. Now that he saw such a strange situation, his first guess was, did the enemy retreat in full? If all of them had retreated, then it was indeed impossible to send anyone else. Therefore, he thought it was those 2 teams. However, Diwu Qingru didn't let his guard down just because of that. He ordered, "All troops on guard. Don't act rashly. Emotianji spending billions of purple crystals is definitely not just a feint. If we miss out on today's terrain and opportunity, even if Emotianji wants to fight another battle and set up such a formation again in the future, he won't have such an opportunity anymore. This place must be the main battlefield without a doubt. Since Emotianji wants to compete with us in terms of patience, then let's compete. Let's see who loses their cool first." Diwu Qingru's eyes shone brightly. "Tell Elder Shao that I'm asking him not to act rashly." The Alliance army didn't move, and the entire Li clan was missing. The so-called final battle actually ended abruptly and didn't really start all this while. It was obvious that both sides were competing in terms of patience. Whoever lost their cool first would be at a disadvantage. Diwu Qingru waved his hand and Lan Mofeng instantly gave the order. The 2 teams that were originally crouching in the snow quickly floated up to the top of the mountain like white smoke. They looked down at the canyon from above, paying attention to any sign of movement. Everyone unsheathed their weapons, as if they were facing a great enemy. Not to say that they were jittery, but it was more or less the same. However, even when they occupied the commanding heights of the mountain top, the fear of being attacked didn't happen at all. They actually managed to occupy this crucial vantage point without any risk. Below, it was still a vast expanse of flat land without any movement. However, everyone knew that their own team of more than 3,000 people was below the layer of snow. And the other side's troops were also hiding in the same layer of snow. However, why wasn't there any movement from this layer of snow that was either too big nor too small? He believed that any random person would be able to flip this entire place over, right? Emotianji stood high up in the sky and looked down with a smile. He looked very confident. Chulur was a little confused. "Big brother Mo, I really don't understand what you're up to this time." Emotianji chuckled. I can't say. Humph. Who cares?" Chulur turned her head and pouted. Emotianji's heart softened. He said telepathically, "Actually, if you think about it carefully, you'll understand why. Everyone can change their tricks. It's just that each trick is ingenious and different." Chulur frowned and thought hard. She thought about all the causes and effects but still came up with nothing. She could only look at Emotianji with dissatisfaction, obviously waiting for him to explain. Emotianji smiled bitterly. He wanted to help, but couldn't. He couldn't explain at this time. They were really too close to the enemy now. A mid-level supreme martial artist might be able to intercept his telepathic message. Mo Tianji couldn't take this risk. Even though Wu Jueqing's move made Mo Tianji not worry about his own safety, he could at least keep an eye on you instead of attacking you, right? Apart from his calm expression, Mo Tianji couldn't help but admire him a little. At this moment, he felt the same as Diwu Qingru. He had punched empty air. Diwu Qingru chose to deal with the myriad of changes by remaining unchanged. He completely ignored the various facades that Mo Tianji had put up. From beginning to end, he bided his time and remained motionless like a mountain. He completely guarded his vital points. This move also gave Mo Tianji an endless headache. Originally, Mo Tianji's plan was that if Diwu Qingru fell for it, and directly sent people over, then he could make use of his best moves to withdraw his people and exchange places with the enemy. The place that Mo Tianji had set up as the center of the battle here, the place where he could unleash the greatest power, wasn't where he was but where Diwu Qingru was. Think about it. If they set up camp here and then suddenly gave up, how could the enemy not come over to check if they sensed something was wrong? Once they discovered an empty city here, their first reaction would be, the enemy has escaped. Especially under such circumstances, it was absolutely reasonable for the Li clan to make a collective retreat in order to prolong their feeble existence. Then, all their attention would naturally be focused on the deeper areas. The people over there would smoothly move over and occupy the enemy's main camp. This could be said to be a huge strategic advantage. But if they accidentally discovered that the enemy didn't escape at all at this time, but instead slipped over to their side and attacked their base, how could they not turn around and counterattack? But as long as they turned around and counterattacked, they would fall into Mo Tianji's great trap. At that time, Snow's ambush and all kinds of formations would be fully activated. Mo Tianji was very confident that he could make the enemy's 8th grade supreme martial artists lose their lives in such a trap. But the problem now is, you have planned everything to be comfortable, but the other party is not acting according to your script at all. You hope to make him smarter, but he is as dumb as a pig and doesn't move at all. In terms of chess, it was like Mo Tianji and Diwu Qingru were playing a life and death game. Mo Tianji let Diwu Qingru taste my anger first, then Mo Tianji let Diwu Qingru taste your anger, and then Mo Tianji set up a dragon-slaying trap. As long as Diwu Qingru came over, Mo Tianji's dragon would definitely be slain. But Diwu Qingru didn't react at all. No matter how tempting you are, I have a rule that I won't go over. You can do whatever you want. This move of Diwu Qingru's was really very troublesome. What should he do? Mo Tianji naturally understood that Diwu Qingru was definitely not a pig. He probably did this because he had seen through half of his plan. But the problem was that both of them were at their wits' end. A mistake. In this world, the pros outweigh the cons, or the cons outweigh the pros. There really isn't anything that is completely beneficial. Mo Tianji sighed. All of this, including stabilizing the mountain, shouldn't have happened. But if the mountain wasn't stabilized beforehand, the enemy would have already destroyed this place. Now that the mountain is stabilized, the enemy also smoothly believes that this is the location of the final battle. Instead, it made the enemy suspicious. How can we resolve the current predicament? Mo Tianji frowned. They were in a dilemma now. On the other side, Diwu Qingru also frowned. He thought of the same problem as Mo Tianji. How can we resolve the current predicament? Both sides were in a dilemma now. The other side was facing a huge problem. No one dared to make the first move. And Diwu Qingru knew that Mo Tianji definitely had a backup plan. He could only react to it. Once he took the initiative to attack, he would definitely have to pay a considerable price. So the initiative was mostly in the hands of the enemy. So if Mo Tianji didn't make a move, he wouldn't make the first move. And this was precisely what Mo Tianji was most uncomfortable about. If you don't make a move, how can I proceed to the next step? Both sides are actually in a deadlock. On the mountain in the north, Great Sword Master Chu clicked his tongue in wonder. This is the first time I've seen Mo Tianji in such a dilemma. The more he looked at the situation, the more he wanted to laugh. Mo Qingwu was also frowning. Now both sides are waiting for the other to make the first move. But no one dares to make the first move. Second brother has clearly made some mistakes here. But it doesn't become his mistake. If he didn't do those things, I'm afraid this battle would have already ended. But the current situation is truly unbearable. To be honest, Mo Tianji has already done too well so far. The fundamental reason is that the Li clan is too weak. Wu Juqing said fairly. Chapter 1522. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. This isn't a reason. If it's difficult, it's difficult. Dong Wushang snorted. Even if it's Mo Tianji facing 800,000 supreme martial artists alone. With such a huge disparity in strength, it's still difficult. Wu Jueqing snorted heavily. He really wanted to slap this guy into a rock. Damn it, even though I know you're telling the truth, isn't this truth a little too ugly? We have to help him break this stalemate, Chu Zhang said. If this stalemate continues, Mo Tianji and Diwu Qingru can keep their composure. But I'm afraid, the experts from the Li clan won't be able to keep their composure. If they make a move, it'll be completely ruined. Besides, not far from the north is the Li clan's base camp. Even though the allied forces won't deal with the women and children there before the end of the battle, if someone can't keep their composure and decides to check, it'll also be a huge problem. Our side has this concern, but the allied forces don't. They can continue to drag this out. In this kind of stalemate, no matter which side takes the initiative first, they'll definitely lose, or even die. Amole frowned. I've been thinking about this problem too. But how can we break this awkward stalemate? Chu Yang calmly spat out a word. Lure! Given the current situation, both Diwu Qingru and Mo Tianji knew that they were at a stalemate. Mo Tianji wanted to break the stalemate, but so did Diwu Qingru. Neither of them was willing to let the stalemate continue like this. Two exceptionally intelligent people, faced with the same situation, each used their strongest intelligence to plot against the other. The result of racking their brains was actually a stalemate like this. Because at this moment, whoever made the first move would be at a disadvantage. Even though Diwu Qingru had sent out a group of people, it was far from all of them. The Allied forces still had a lot of backup forces. On the other side, more than half of them had yet to move. Mo Tianji knew that Diwu Qingru was waiting for him to make a move before making a move. But he didn't know how much strength he was still holding back and how he was preparing to deal with the backup. This was the so-called knowing how it is, but not why it is. Diwu Qingru could launch a head-on attack at any time if Mo Tianji made the first move. And Mo Tianji wouldn't be able to bear the consequences of that. On the other hand, it was the same for Diwu Qingru. Diwu Qingru knew that Mo Tianji had ordered the Li clan members to hide so that he could make the first move. However, he didn't know how Mo Tianji was going to act. If he moved first and the other party launched a full-scale counterattack, then he would be at a disadvantage. Therefore, either of them could make the first move, nor did they want to make the first move. At a time like this, they could only fall into a stalemate. Also, Mo Tianji and Diwu Qingru were both clear about one thing: if there was no external force to break this stalemate could only continue. It could take a day, 10 days, or even 3 to 5 months. But if this stalemate continued, both of them would be equally anxious. In comparison, Mo Tianji's concerns were greater. The Li clan's foundation was far inferior to the alliance's. If Diwu Qingru gave up on the battle of wits with him, and the alliance was willing to pay a certain amount of losses, they could definitely break through the last line of defense in one go and march into the Li clan's headquarters. Then, it would be completely over. Therefore, both of them were eagerly waiting for an external force to intervene. As long as an external force intervened, this stalemate could be broken. Once the stalemate was broken, there would naturally be endless follow-up. And Chu Yang also saw this aspect and decided to make a move. The two wise men were in a stalemate. Naturally, they needed a third party to change the situation. Lure? Mo Qingwu said worriedly. But how? We don't have many people here. How can we intervene? Haha, right now, I can only use myself as bait to break this delicate stalemate. This is the only way to create an opportunity for Mo Tianji. Chu Yang took a deep breath. Using himself as bait? Entering the battlefield alone? No! How can we do that? Everyone said at the same time. It's really too risky. Even Wu Juqing didn't agree with this. The battle in front of them couldn't be compared to a battle in the secular world. It was a battle formed by countless supreme martial artist experts. Even someone as strong as Wu Juqing might not be able to gain an advantage if he entered alone, let alone Chu Yang. Currently, he was only a second-grade supreme martial artist. If he entered recklessly, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he would die. I know that this is a risky move. However, if we continue to drag this out, it will be greatly disadvantageous to Tianji's deployment. Once Diwu Qingru loses his patience and gives up on the battle between the wise men with Tianji, then there will be no turning back the situation, Chu Yang said. Just as Chu Yang was trying his best to persuade everyone and everyone was insistent on dissuading him, a sudden change occurred. There was actually another external force intervening. It was just that no one would have thought that the external force would actually be this person. This external force could be Chu Yang, it could be Tan Tan, it could even be Wu Juqing. Of course, if Wu Juqing were to intervene at this time, it would seem a little too shameless. However, this person's appearance at this time was really too unexpected. Just as both sides were in a stalemate where they could neither advance nor retreat, a clear and bright laughter suddenly rang out. Then, a green figure streaked across the sky like a shooting star, bringing with it a fresh and refreshing morning breeze. That green figure stood in front of Diwu Qingru's troops just like that. Moreover, he was using a very arrogant, unbridled, and unscrupulous attitude to face them with a golden blade. It was the kind of despicable behavior that you wanted to beat him up 100 times, 1,000 times, even in your dreams. Xiao Chunyu's pupils shrank rapidly. It's you! It's actually you! I haven't gone to look for you yet, and you actually dare to come out on your own! That person laughed wildly. In the air, he was graceful and elegant as if he was good at dancing with his long sleeves. He recited slowly, I am the king of all the lands! If Chu Jiang could see it, then Dukyu, who was also extremely intelligent, could naturally see it as well. Therefore, he simply jumped out on his own. Not to mention the commotion caused by that person's unexpected appearance on the Allied army's side, even Chu Yang's side was extremely shocked. It was actually this fellow who had come, and he came so casually too. Was he casually or mentally ill? This question was a matter of opinion. Chu Yang's face twitched very strangely for a moment. Dong Wushang's face also instantly flattened. Who was Wu Jueqing? He immediately noticed the abnormality. Very interested, he asked. What's wrong? Who is this arrogant fellow? You know him, right? Chu Yang smiled bitterly. I really want to say that I don't know this arrogant fellow. Unfortunately, I can't. Not only do I not know him, Xiao Wu also knows this fellow. His name is Dukyu. Dukyu, huh? Wu Jueqing smacked his lips. This fellow's entrance is quite extravagant, Chu Yang said with a twisted face. Extravagant? It is indeed extravagant. You don't know, but every time he appears he always says these two sentences. When I first heard these two sentences I really felt that this person was really imposing, really awe-inspiring, really magnanimous. When I heard these two sentences for the second time, I still felt very shocked. When it came to the third time, I felt that it was very normal and didn't feel anything special anymore. Later on, he would say it every time, as if he didn't know what fatigue was. This caused me to become completely numb a long time ago. Until now, every time I hear these two sentences, a layer of goosebumps will rise all over my body. In the ranking of the degree of disgust, he is definitely in the top 3. Chu Yang heaved a huge sigh. Too pretentious. Really, as if he would die if he didn't, Just like now, in front of a force that could crush him to death hundreds of times, he can actually still say those 2 sentences so impressively. I really have to take my hat off to him. The legendary playing with one's life is nothing more than this. Upon hearing Chu Yang's words, Wu Jueqing looked again at the handsome, elegant and graceful Duke Yu in midair. He felt rather emotional in his heart. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and shake his head. This fellow indeed deserves a beating. Isn't his level of arrogance even greater than mine? The Allied forces are also goddamn gutless. That little one is already like this and still acting like a coward. Don't let the Allied forces really take care of him. That bastard still owes me a fight. Dong Wushang snorted and said, Sooner or later, I will definitely beat that little one into a pig's head. And I will beat him up in front of his wife and aunt. Only then can I vent my anger. Everyone stared at each other. They were all rather impressed by this fellow's valiance. You, a mere second-grade supreme martial artist, actually dared to say that you want to beat up another second-grade supreme martial artist. Especially when you are a saber supremacy, but what you said just now was beat up. What kind of props do you use to beat up? It seems like you can only use your fists and legs. Then, where exactly did Dong Wushang get such great confidence from? Also, to be able to make Dong Wushang so depressed, Duke Yu's power was really impressive. Wu Jueqing had also trampled on Dong Wushang many times, but he had never seen this fellow harboring such hatred in his heart. Not to mention the condemnation here. On the other side, Duke Yu's unexpected appearance had already achieved very good results. The Allied forces were naturally still very gutsy. Miao Zhendong and his brother were the first to step out. They cursed loudly. You damned beast! How dare you come here to provoke us? It's time for you to die, you evil creature! Xiao Qingyu, however, stepped out from the crowd. The spiritual monsters of heaven and earth are indeed extraordinary. You actually recovered so quickly from my attack that day. Really impressive. Chapter 1524. Part 7, Chapter 821, A Long Line. Everyone, don't panic, listen to my command! Diwu Qingru shouted in midair. Everyone, listen to my command. Don't panic. Maintain the original formation, head to tail. The strongest person in each team will be the vanguard, and the law enforcement officers will take the lead. Set up the formation. Resist the strong enemy. Delay the enemy. As long as we can delay until old Xiao and the rest return, victory will still be ours. In an instant, pieces of purple crystals scattered on the ground. No matter what, they were all veterans who had at least hundreds of years of cultivation. They knew that the situation in front of them was very dangerous. If they panicked, it would be no different from courting death. The only thing they could do was to work together to resist the attack and try their best to survive. They quickly calmed down. A dense light circle rose, and an inexplicable energy surged. The formation had already taken shape in the blink of an eye. According to the original strategic arrangement, the Yi clan was supposed to take the lead. But now that Yi Xiaoyao and 2 other 8th-grade supreme martial artists of the Yi clan who came as reinforcements had gone out to chase after the treasure, they had no choice but to let the law enforcement officers, who were the strongest, take the lead. Diwu Qingru sighed in his heart. What he said just now was just to calm the hearts of the people, so that their formation wouldn't collapse completely. In the face of such a strong force, why would they need to defend? There wasn't even a chance to hope for a fluke. What he was doing now was just to prepare for a rainy day and set up a simple long line formation with both offense and defense. He had done his best. Even if Diwu Qingru was as intelligent as a demon, he was ultimately not a prophet. If he wasn't, who would have thought that such a bizarre thing would happen at the last minute? All the important people had left? Wasn't this bullshit? What the fuck is this? But even so, Diwu Qingru still wouldn't give up just like that. He knew that resistance was futile, but he still had to do his best to face the current battle. Even if there was only a slim chance, he still had to put in a lot of effort. In the end, this battle wasn't a battle between the Li clan and the allied forces, but a battle between himself and Emotianji. Diwu Qingru would never give up so easily. Even if all the high-level supreme martial artists of the Li clan were to come in full force, if the remaining people were to act according to his command, they might not necessarily be unable to resist. In fact, as long as they dragged on, they might even have a chance to counterattack. At the same time, Emo Tianji's cold voice came from afar. "One of you attack its head. 4 of you attack its abdomen. The rest of you kill its tail. Attack quickly!" The high-level supreme martial artists of the Li clan scattered in midair. Diwu Qingru acted according to the situation and ordered, "Blooming abdomen, blooming flowers fill the sky! Boom!" The army on the mountaintop simultaneously raised their qi and prepared to attack. When the enemy in the abdomen landed, this force would meet them head-on and deliver a head-on blow. "Transform into a long dragon and attack first!" Emo Tianji also shouted. No matter what, he had to force all these people down the mountain. Even if he had taken advantage of them, it was still impossible to wipe them all out. It was just a fool's dream. The current highest strategy was to take advantage of the delicate moment when the other side's masters were all out to take advantage of the situation and drive the remaining people down the mountain. This way, he would achieve his expected strategic goal. Boom! Light flashed. The swords and sabers in the hands of Li Xianxi and the others turned into streaks of sharp light at the same time. Like shocking rainbows, they flew out of their hands with the coldest and most terrifying killing intent. In midair, they were like small suns, emitting the most dazzling light and slashing down on the crowd below. "Let go!" Diwu Qingru roared. Below, more than 3,000 swords also flew out of their hands at the same time, facing the meteor-like sabers and the terrifying destructive force in midair. If this force landed within the formation of the allied forces would immediately collapse. Even if the formation was destroyed, the people would die too. Now that their individual combat power was far inferior to the opponent, they could only rely on the combined forces of everyone to resist. Boom, boom, boom! The combined efforts of more than 3,000 people collided fiercely with the power of this top expert. The momentum at this moment seemed to be even greater than the explosion of 8,000 people previously. Rumbling sounds of mountains collapsing and the earth cracking could still be heard from thousands of miles away. However, the mountaintop under everyone's feet did not move at all. Countless people turned pale. When they raised their heads, blood spurted out of their mouths. The 8 high-level supreme martial artists above, including Li Chunbue, all spurted out blood at the same time. Their individual strength was far superior, and their combined attack was enough to shake the heavens and earth. However, the combined efforts of more than 3,000 supreme martial artists, coupled with the power of the formation, was equally earth-shattering. Although both parties were only throwing weapons at each other across space, the impact of the tremors and the influence of the energy movement on each other was still terrifying beyond compare. Divine senses vibrated, internal organs vibrated, and souls vibrated. This was still thanks to the collision of weapons that were thrown out. If they were really held in their hands, even Li Chunbo would probably die in such a collision. "Change the formation!" Diwu Qingru let out a loud shout, and the long snake formation below suddenly changed. It rolled like a wave. The experts inside didn't dare to be negligent even if they were injured or not. They shifted their positions and changed the formation. "Flying dragon illusory form, attack, defend!" Following Diwu Qingru's command, everyone had already attacked while they were moving. Streams of the purest supreme martial artist's origin energy madly shot toward Li Chunbue and the others in midair. Diwu Qingru's command was very clear. It was both an attack and a defense. Moreover, after the formation transformed into this flying dragon illusory form, it immediately started to circulate. Li Chunbue and the others were facing different opponents at every moment. In other words, even if you successfully injured the person opposite you a moment ago, by the time you wanted to reap the fruits of your labor, you would realize that the person in front of you had already changed. It was another person who was full of energy and was completely uninjured. The ultimate purpose of setting up such a formation was not to attack the enemy but to defend and stall for time, waiting for Xiao Qingyu and the others to return. It was not that Diwu Qingro did not want to make use of this power to take down Li Chunbua and the others. In fact, although this person was strong, it was still difficult for him to fight against the combined strength of more than 1,000 experts. However, when he saw that more than 1,000 people from the Li clan were also about to arrive, he immediately changed his mind. If he insisted on annihilating the great experts, he might have a chance to kill a few of these high-level supreme martial artists. However, the formation would collapse instantly under the attacks of the remaining 1,000 people. Once the formation collapsed, the forces could not be gathered together. Then, they could only be slaughtered unilaterally by the remaining high-level supreme martial artists. Calculating in this way, the losses would greatly outweigh the gains. Mo Tianji, who was in the air, was also constantly giving orders. Li Chunbua and the others were also constantly changing their positions. Under Mo Tianji's command, the targets of every attack were all targeted at the weak points of the formation. The targets were precise, and every move was on point. However, the opponent was the combined strength of thousands of people. No matter how powerful Li Chunbua and the others were, it was like trying to put out a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. They could not really pose a fatal threat. It was like punching at the sea. Even if they could create a huge ripple every time, even if they could create a huge disturbance, to this boundless sea, it was just a ripple. However, this man-made formation was ultimately not the sea. There was always a limit to how much it could withstand. In the formation, the number of injured people continued to increase. Diwu Qingrou's expression was calm, but it was already so calm that it was stiff. He kept giving orders and making adjustments. Although the number of injured people was increasing, he had already stabilized his state of mind and identified the positions. The changes in the formation, however, were becoming more and more skillful. In addition, he could vaguely feel that the other party's intention of putting in so much effort to come up with this move was probably not to annihilate the people here. After all, even if there were no more high-level supreme martial artist experts, there were still more than thousands of 4th and 5th grade supreme martial artists here. They could not be swallowed. If they were to forcefully swallow them, they would only choke to death. Since they could not swallow them, they had to use force. This meant that Mo Tianji had other plans, and the only thing worth scheming about here was the terrain here. What the enemy needed was what he would not abandon. Persevering and defending was the best way to counterattack. Therefore, Diwu Qingro did not retreat an inch. As long as the formation did not completely collapse, they had to continue defending. Deafening battle cries rang out. The Li clan's reinforcements had finally reached the top of the mountain. Mo Tianji's orders were even more urgent and faster. To Mo Tianji, this mountain was indeed of utmost importance. This was because he had put in a lot of effort here. He had never thought of wiping out all these people in one go. That was obviously unrealistic. His original intention was only to force them away. But what Mo Tianji really did not expect was that Diwu Qingro, who clearly had the absolute advantage in terms of combat power, would actually rehearse such an offensive and defensive formation in advance. Strictly speaking, this formation was Mo Tianji's loss. If it were not for the absence of the other party's experts, his side might have been completely annihilated. In this formation, Diwu Qingro lost to the heavens, but won against man. It was just that whether man could conquer the heavens or not was still unknown. Diwu Qingro had seen through Mo Tianji's scheme. Mo Tianji had lost by a small margin. After finally having a chance to turn things around, the other party's well-prepared formation appeared here. This was equivalent to losing 2 rounds in a row. Although there were not too many substantial losses at the moment, Mo Tianji was already in awe. Although he never dared to underestimate the enemy, this time, he had more or less underestimated Diwu Qingro and his tenacity. In this world, I am not the only one who knows how to plan for a rainy day. As Mo Tianji commanded, he secretly told himself. I am not the only one who is smart. I must not make such a mistake again. I must not underestimate any opponent. and Mo Tianji's gaze was deep. This time it was the Li clan. But if the same mistake is made next time, my brothers and I will bear the consequences. Chapter 1525. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Mo Tianji looked at the battle and said, "Yes." Chu Lur said indifferently, "I don't think so. Actually, either of you are underestimating the other. On the contrary, both of you think too highly of each other. Therefore, although both of you are fully focused now and think that you are going all out, the more you think about it, the more you can't give your all. As the saying goes, follow your heart. Only then can you really give it your all." Mo Tianji's eyes lit up, deep in thought. Chu Lur said, "Actually, no matter if it's a human, a god or a demon, you, Mo Tianji, are Mo Tianji. This will never change." She turned around, her eyes sparkling. She said softly, "Mo Tianji will never become Chu Yang or Ao Xianyun. Yes, no matter if it's a human, a god or a demon, I, Mo Tianji, am Mo Tianji. I won't become Chu Yang, and I won't become Ao Xianyun. This will never change." Mo Tianji only felt that an inexplicable chain in his heart was suddenly broken by Chu Lur's few words. It was like a person who had been in a dark place for a long time suddenly opening a door in front of him. The darkness in front of him disappeared, and only endless bright sunlight shone in front of him. Mo Tianji took a deep look at Chu Lur and said sincerely, "Thank you, Lur. Although you are younger than me, you are really my benefactor." Turning around, Mo Tianji continued to give orders. The battle below was getting more and more intense. One by one, the Li clan's supreme martial artists attacked the Great Formation crazily. In the Great Formation, there were people who kept spitting out mouthfuls of blood, and then their bodies shattered. Under such attacks, it was no different from a fool's dream to leave a complete corpse. At the moment when you can't move, you don't know how much power will explode on your body. Yet, the Great Formation continued to move at high speed like a dragon. On this steep mountain peak, there was no chaos at all. Diwu Qingrou's orders were given precisely one after another. Wherever there was a weakness, there would be immediately remedied. Diwu Qingrou made up his mind to defend till death. No matter what, he had to defend till death. This mountain peak couldn't be given to Mo Tianji. The Li clan people didn't have it easy either. Just this kind of recoil alone had already caused the death of several supreme martial artists. The 8th grade supreme martial artist went all out and attacked wildly, but in the face of the tyrannical power condensed by the formation, he was powerless and helpless. As time passed by bit, Li Chunbo became more and more anxious. How could they not be anxious? This was clearly a heaven-sent opportunity, yet they were unable to grasp it. They were powerless to grasp it. Xiao Qingyu and the others could return at any time. If they allowed this formation to hold on until Xiao Qingyu's return, then all of them would definitely be annihilated here. This was a heaven-sent opportunity, but now could become a heaven-sent opportunity at any time. At this moment, Mo Tianji's voice rang out. 2/3 of the supreme martial artists will continue to attack. The other 1/3 will form a triangular formation and charge forward. You have to let go of the dragon's head and tail. Strike diagonally from the dragon's body. Don't face it head on. The opportunity to defeat the enemy is now. Li Chunhua's spirits were lifted. With a long howl, more than 200 experts surrounded them in an instant. Diwu Qingrou's brows furrowed. Li Chunhua had already done this kind of gathering 3 times previously, and there wasn't much of an effect in the end. But for some reason, this time, he had a very different feeling. With a thought, he immediately ordered, "Speed up the formation!" At his command, the speed of conversion of the long snake formation sped up again. Like undulating waves, it was out of control, swift, and violent. However, on the Li clan's side, more than 200 experts quickly surrounded them. Under Li Chunhua's command, they instantly formed a huge triangle. The tip of the triangle was aimed at the formation. Mo Tianji silently calculated the operation of the formation. He shouted, Move 3 fingers to the left of the tip of your feet and cut off at full speed. Li Chunhua let out a long howl. With him as the arrowhead, the 200 experts launched a charge at the same time. At this moment, a long howl pierced through the air from afar. Xiao Qingyu and the others had already started to turn back. Li Chunhua's eyes were almost spurting blood. He roared, "Break!" With his body as the arrowhead, he charged over at lightning speed. This was the last chance. Once lost, there would be no more opportunities. Succeed or die trying. In a fierce battle, every bit of time was also precious. All the high-level experts of the Li clan gave their all in a race against time, wanting to finish the job in an instant. Because Xiao Qingyu and the other enemy experts were about to rush back. If one had to say who was the most anxious, it was still the Li clan's first ancestor, Li Chunhua. If he could grasp such a heaven-sent opportunity, it would be equivalent to leaving the Li clan with a lot more chances of survival. Could it be that he actually couldn't grasp it? Mo Tianji was still calm. He continued to issue orders and adjust the angle. After 7 or 8 adjustments, he finally gave a direct order. Kill! Li Chunhua led his men and charged in at top speed like a sharp arrow. Diwu Qigru had also been carefully adjusting the situation to correspond to Mo Tianji's attacks. However, the moment he heard the words "the dragon's body slanted," Diwu Qigru already knew that the destruction of this great formation was already inevitable. If it were an ordinary army in a battle between two countries, the dragon's body slanted would be a suicidal move. With a wave of the battle flag, the enemy slanted would be completely surrounded and drowned in the ocean. Even until death, they wouldn't be able to display any battle prowess. However, such an army composed entirely of top-notch experts against the enemy was fundamentally different from an ordinary battle formation. The reaction of such experts was 1,000 times more agile than that of an army, or even more. Once it was accurately inserted, the destructive power it could cause was also extremely terrifying. As the name suggested, the straight snake formation was formed based on the transformation of the snake's body. It made use of the snake's characteristics, its flexibility, its head and tail connected, and its entire body linked together, one loop after another, continuous and endless. Attack the head and tail, attack the head and tail, attack the head and tail at the same time. However, when it came to the most powerful attack, it was the moment when the snake's body was turning. This was the time when the power was the strongest and fiercest. Ordinary snakes didn't have scales on their bodies. However, with so many people forming the straight snake formation, then, every person was equivalent to a scale on the snake's body. This was destined to be unavoidable. Although the movement of the snake was immensely powerful and carried with it inertia, its power far exceeded the combat prowess of the snake. However, every time it turned, it was also accompanied by the moment when one of the scales inevitably opened up. That moment was where the flaw was. Purely speaking of the flaw, it wasn't necessarily so. Opening up and then closing up was undoubtedly a flaw, but it could also be a trap. Because the straight snake formation formed by experts was even more tightly connected, it was naturally even harder to find a flaw. Furthermore, Diwu Qingru was constantly giving orders. This kind of flaw was even more fleeting. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was fleeting. Previously, Mo Tianji had commanded to break the formation 7 times in a row, and Diwu Qingru had changed 8 times in a row in order to deal with it. However, there was an additional change. Just when he thought that Mo Tianji would continue to force him to reveal a flaw, Mo Tianji unexpectedly chose to wait. Although he only waited for a moment, it was enough to change the entire situation. After that moment, he immediately ordered Li Chunhua to launch an all-out attack. And at this moment, it just so happened that Diwu Qingru's 8th change had just begun. The old momentum was exhausted, and a new momentum was born. There was no way he could react immediately. Originally, at the moment when Li Chunhua and the others started to attack, the flaw hadn't really appeared yet. However, when this lethal force attacked, the scales of this straight snake formation unavoidably opened up at that moment due to inertia. Naturally, the flaw also appeared along with it. What precise calculations, what frightening scheming, what amazing MOTNG! At this moment, the powerful force that Li Chunhua and the others had gathered rushed in like a sharp knife cutting through tofu. Boom! A series of screams rang out. Li Chunhua rushed into the connecting points of the formation like a mad tiger. His palms were already filled with the fiercest attacks. He struck left and right. Instantly, the sound of bones and tendons breaking rang out one after another. A huge gap appeared in the formation. Li Xiangxi followed closely behind. At this moment, the yearning sword in his hand was used as a huge saber by him. He moved left and right, and there was no way to stop him. A rain of blood instantly rose. Seeing this situation, Diwu Qingru finally sighed helplessly. Although he had already guessed what Motianji's next step would be, there was no other way. The flaw of the Great Formation was here. As long as the attack was targeted, it would be broken sooner or later. This had nothing to do with intelligence. Screams rang out one after another. More than 200 people from the Li clan rushed into the Great Formation. The massacre thus began. It was as if a rain of blood had risen instantly. There was the blood of the allied forces as well as the flesh and blood of the Li clan. The next moment after Li Chunhua rushed in, his clothes had already turned crimson, the brightest color. At this moment, the only thought in his mind was to kill the enemies madly. He didn't think about anything else. Because everything else was no longer important. The more enemies he killed, the more hope the Li clan had. That was all. Everyone, hold on. Try your best to hold on. No one is allowed to retreat. Diwu Qingru was still able to hold on. He continued to command calmly. Although the formation of the Great Formation had been broken and there were flaws in its operation, it was only the abdomen that had been broken. The formation could still be formed from the head and tail. It could still be operated. As long as everyone maintained their composure and held on, they would definitely be able to hold on until Xiao Qingyu and the others returned. Then, the situation would be reversed. Everyone, continue to operate the formation. Accelerate. Don't stop. Don't stop for even a moment. Diwu Qingru's eyes flashed with coldness. This method was equivalent to directly using human lives to fill up the formation. The first few hundred people who rushed up would definitely die in the hands of this group of Li clan experts. However, as long as everyone wasn't afraid of death and continued to press forward, not only would they be able to make up for the collapse of the Great Formation, they could even wrap up these people from the Li clan like dumplings. After all, it wasn't as if the Li clan experts didn't pay a price for the attack just now. Even Li Chunhua also suffered a considerable amount of backlash. However, if they gave up on the formation just like that, they would instead fall into the fate of being slaughtered. Without the support of the Great Formation, the 4th grade and 5th grade supreme martial artists didn't have the ability to withstand even a move or two from a high-level supreme martial artist. Chapter 1526. Elderly! Hold on, everyone, hold on! Motianji shouted. The dawn of victory has appeared. As long as we don't let the enemy charge past here, the formation will be completely broken. Hearing this, Li Chunhua seemed to have received divine help. He let out a long roar and attacked with all his might. He was really like a cornerstone, going on a killing spree against the experts of the allied forces who were charging toward him like raging waves. Countless broken limbs and body parts flew in front of him, and heads rolled out one by one. The number of the 200-odd experts of the Li clan who were following him also decreased rapidly. However, no one took a step back. They would rather die than take a step back. On the other hand, the experts of the Li clan on the other two sides were charging toward them rapidly with red eyes. For a moment, the sounds of fighting were earth-shattering. A storm of blood engulfed the entire place. At this moment, even the commands from the two sides couldn't be heard at all. However, no one cared about that anymore. There was only charge and kill. Everyone's eyes were bloodshot. On the other side, Xiao Qingyu and the rest were also rushing back anxiously. Right now, they were also extremely angry, annoyed, and somewhat humiliated. Until now, everyone still didn't know what that monster was, and what kind of method it used. It just blindly led everyone in a big circle, and from beginning to end, refused to face it head on. Every time they felt that they were about to be caught up, and were about to be surrounded, it would suddenly disappear, and then reappear in another place not far away. Xiao Qingyu and the others were toyed with until their eyes were spitting fire. They almost lost their rationality, and even planned to attack with all their might. If they really launched a large-scale indiscriminate attack, and with so many people joining hands, they definitely wouldn't be able to hide their tracks anymore. However, they didn't expect that the monster would suddenly disappear after circling around. Everyone joined forces and activated their divine senses to search a large area. However, they didn't find anything. Filled with hope, they could only turn back unhappily. However, to their surprise, they realized that their base had already been turned upside down. Shocked, everyone naturally sped up and rushed over. However, they were really too far away. Even if they rushed back at full speed, they wouldn't be able to return in an instant. Li Chunhua! How dare you! Xiao Qingyu roared from afar. Both sides of the battle immediately had a change of mood. The allied forces were naturally overjoyed, but the Li clan's side was shocked and even a little disorganized. At this moment, the Li clan already had the full initiative. As long as they persevered a little longer, the allied forces would definitely be forced down the mountain even though they had the advantage in numbers. Even with Diwu Qingrou's flawless command, it definitely couldn't compare to the psychological pressure of this high-level supreme martial artist. But at this delicate moment, Xiao Qingyu and the others actually rushed back. This naturally gave the allied forces a backbone, and their will to resist increased greatly. Diwu Qingrou quietly let out a sigh of relief. Even someone as intelligent as him hadn't thought that things would develop to this point. It was supposed to be a decisive battle. But it had somehow evolved into a battle of gains and losses. In fact, it had even turned into a place where the final battle would take place. He didn't know why Mo Tianji wanted this place, but he wouldn't give it up no matter what. Having ruled over the battlefield for so many years, he could even predict that if this piece of land was given to Mo Tianji, there would definitely be trouble that would be 10 times more troublesome than now. And that trouble, at that time, he would definitely have to shoulder it himself. Diwu Qingrou didn't want to. He really didn't want to. Now that they had finally persevered until Xiao Qingyu and the others returned, Diwu Qingrou's heart was finally at ease. After all, this place wasn't lost. Although the heavens played tricks on people, people could still triumph over the heavens. Mo Tianji also sighed at this time. At this point, it really couldn't be said that he didn't try his best. Originally, the heavens were all on his side. Dooku must have done his best to bring so many high-level supreme martial artists with him. Any one or two of them would be able to kill him. It was as if he was circling in front of the king of Hell's palace. He would often go to the entrance of the Yellow Springs and return. If this continued, Dooku might have died somewhere. This was why he had no choice but to end it. It was a pity that the time he bought wasn't enough. Even if he had just a little more time to catch his breath, Mo Tianji sighed and was about to order the army to retreat. Now, the Li clan still had the upper hand. It shouldn't be difficult for them to retreat. But if they waited until Xiao Qingyu and the others returned, then it wouldn't be a matter of whether they retreated or not. It was very likely that the Li clan would announce its demise in advance. However, at this delicate juncture, a faint voice said, "Tribulation has been gone for 10,000 years. Tribulation sword rules the world. Tribulation sword rules the world. Tribulation sword rules the world." The voice was very calm, but the figures of Xiao Qingyu and the others who were running at high speed stopped in an instant. One by one, they turned around and looked at the source of the voice. At that place, there seemed to be a little bit of light jumping out suddenly. It was as if it had suddenly appeared from the void, shooting out billions of bright and dazzling lights. Xiao Qingyu's pupils shrank. This was the sword tip of a sword. Looking at this shape, everyone present could recognize it. Behind him, The dozens of supreme martial artist experts were also shocked. They almost couldn't breathe. They only felt that their hearts were beating like drums. Even breathing seemed to be difficult. As long as one wasn't an idiot, they would know that the tip of the sword, coupled with the words spoken just now, was enough to tell that Tribulation's sword had reappeared. The master of Tribulation's sword had returned to the world. The legend of 10,000 years, the mystery of 10,000 years. Today, at this moment, they could finally see the legendary divine sword. That sword tip was floating in the air, swallowing and spitting out cold light. The sun shone in the sky, but it couldn't suppress the light of the sword tip. It was just a sword, and it was only a small part of the sword tip, but everyone's eyes revealed the most fanatical look. And an unprecedented majestic pressure. That was a supreme divine object. Just a sword tip, and everyone's mind was seized. Suddenly, there was a piercingly cold aura flickering, and another object that was flickering with light appeared out of nowhere. The sword blade. The sword tip suddenly rushed to the sky and grew in the wind. It actually became 10 feet long in the air. It was just a little bit of starlight just now, but now it grew hundreds of times, thousands of times in the air. The sword blade followed with a schwa sound. With a flash of light, it was side by side with the sword tip. It stood tall in the air. The cold light seemed to be the blinking eyes of thousands of ghosts in hell. Under the clear blue sky, there was a sense of gloominess that came out of nowhere. Then, with a loud sound, the sword blade also appeared. The cold light flashed, and everyone felt a chill in their hearts. It was as if a sea of blood and a mountain of corpses had appeared in front of them. It was so tragic. Then, it was the sword guard. The sword tongue. The sword hilt. The sword pommel. There were a total of 7 parts of the sword. They circled and danced in the air, each with its own spirit, each with its own power. Then, clang! With a clear sound, the sword tip took the lead and rushed to the sky. The sword blade followed, and with a ka sound, it merged with the sword tip. A burst of dazzling light flashed, and a strange feeling of fighting the world side by side arose in everyone's heart. It was as if the sword tip and the sword blade were brothers who had been separated for 10,000 years. Now that they had reunited after a long separation, they were reunited and fighting the world side by side. Clang! The sword blade rose mightily and lit up, joining the sword tip and the sword blade. They merged seamlessly in the air. The sword body had already taken shape. Then, the 2 sides of the sword guard flew up and embedded into the sword body. The curved arc was just enough to protect the hand holding the sword. It was an awe-inspiring guard. The sword tongue flew up with a schwa sound, and with a 7-colored light, it entered the ranks of the swords. Then, the sword hilt suddenly moved forward, and with a ka sound, it took the sword tongue into its embrace. Then, the sword pommel flew up like a meteor. With a ka sound, it appeared in the fixed position. A long sword was thus formed. The moment the sword was formed, it suddenly exploded with thousands of rays of light, standing majestically between heaven and earth. It was as if this calamity sword also knew that it had not appeared in the open on this continent for 10,000 years. This time, it appeared with its head held high, and looked down on all eternity, intimidating the masses. It just floated in the air like this, the sword tip pointing straight at the sky. This sword was more than 100 feet long, but it did not give people the feeling that it was too big or inappropriate. That perfect streamline, that ingenious design, made everyone extremely fond of it. However, that awe-inspiring aura that swept through everything made everyone feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. A clear sound rang out, and then, a white light like a swimming dragon flew out like lightning. Like a swallow returning to its nest, it actually plunged into the sword body of the calamity sword. Then, the whole sword body shone brighter, and the white light inside could be faintly seen swimming back and forth, as if it was very excited and happy. Calamity sword! Xiao Qingyu was dazzled, and muttered, "It's really the calamity sword. This is the calamity sword that has dominated the heavens for 10,000 years. This sword has really reappeared in the world." Everyone stared at the sword in a daze. For a moment, no one responded to Xiao Qingyu's words. This sword had already attracted all of their attention. The one who obtained the Calamity Sword ruled the world. The one who obtained the Calamity Sword turned yin and yang. The one who obtained the Calamity Sword reversed reincarnation. The one who obtained the Calamity Sword saved the world. All the legends and legends about the Calamity Sword reverberated in everyone's minds. Calamity Sword. A laugh that shook the wind and thunder, a rage that made the sea cold, a hand that broke the firmament, a sword that danced across the sky. If this sword fell into my hands, then, the one who could do all this, would be me. I am the master of the firmament, I am the master of the earth, I am invincible, I am supreme. Xiao Qinyu looked at the Calamity Sword, and the intoxication in his eyes gradually disappeared. Slowly it turned into a cruel look, and he said indifferently, "Since the Calamity Sword has appeared, is the master of the Calamity Sword still not willing to come out and meet me?" His voice was not very loud, but it echoed in the air like muffled thunder. The intoxication of all the experts was shattered by this muffled voice, and they were suddenly awakened. Yes, there was still the master of the Calamity Sword. Chapter 1527. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. They couldn't help but widen their eyes and listen attentively. They wanted to hear what the legendary master of Calamity Sword was going to say. He only heard that indifferent, detached, indifferent, and cold voice say, "Xiao Qingyu, the elderly should cultivate their mind in nature, and enjoy the rest of their lives. It's not good to have a hot temper at your age. It's not good for cultivation, heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, and spleen." Even with Xiao Qingyu's calmness and cultivation, his body couldn't help but sway a little after hearing this. The supreme martial artists behind him all felt their vision go dark. Did the master of Calamity's sword really say these words? Did the master of Calamity's sword really say these words? This was too shocking. It wasn't that they were shocked by the content, but the nonsense was too shocking. What was even more shocking was that this kind of nonsense could actually be said in such a solemn, indifferent, and aloof voice. This was really a realm. Hee hee. Everyone wants to see me? All right, then I'm coming out. A faint laughter sounded. Everyone held their breaths and waited for the legendary figure to appear. Hee hee. I'm really coming out. The faint laughter sounded again. Everyone's face was filled with black lines. Was a legendary figure really that legendary? Hee hee. I'm really coming out. The faint voice sounded very serious. What the fuck, was this legendary figure still breathing? PFFF. Everyone held their breaths and waited for him. In the end, this guy came out 3 times in a row, but they still didn't see him. Everyone felt that they couldn't hold their breaths anymore, and they all spat it out. Everyone looked at each other and realized that the person opposite them had an extremely strange expression. The master of Calamity's sword, who was the center of attention and was almost regarded as a god by the people of the heaven realm, was actually so unruly? How could they endure this? Are you coming out or not? Xiao Qingyu couldn't bear it any more and shouted. Why is the old man's temper so bad? His personality is so impatient. It's hard for him to achieve great things. The voice complained sincerely. Xiao Qingyu almost vomited blood. He wanted to flick his sleeves and leave. Under everyone's expectant gazes, the air in front of them was filled with a dense void. A young man with a jade-like complexion appeared in the void in front of them with a gentle smile on his face. The moment he appeared, he waved his hand. The Calamity sword in the sky let out a sharp but joyful sword hum. It suddenly shrank and returned to his hand. By the time it reached his palm, it had already returned to the size of an ordinary longsword. The person who came was naturally the master of Calamity's sword, Chu Yang. But when Xiao Qingyu and the others really saw him, the strange feeling in their hearts increased by several points. Was this guy here to fight? Or are you here for a vacation? Sightseeing? Could it be that he was actually here to date? The catastrophe sword master who appeared out of nowhere was wearing a white robe like snow. He looked like a handsome tree in the wind. In his arms, there was a beautiful girl who looked like she was in a painting. She was dressed in red, with a face full of love and gentleness. She was nestled in his arms like a little bird. It was as if a peerless flower had suddenly bloomed on this ancient ice field. The moment they saw this girl again, a heartfelt gentleness and pity suddenly rose in their hearts. "You are the catastrophe sword master?" Yi Xiaoyao seemed to be in disbelief. He finally asked loudly. "Keep your voice down!" Chu Yang looked up at him and said angrily, "Don't scare my beauty." And Mo Qingwu, who was in his arms, turned her bright eyes and said softly, "I'm not a beauty. I'm an ugly monster." Chu Yang said, "If you are an ugly monster, then I'll look at ugly monsters in the future, okay?" The dozens of supreme martial artists on the opposite side were collectively speechless. Everyone was even prepared to see the birth of a peerless hero. Who would have thought that when they opened their eyes wide, they would see a scene of tender love? A talented man and a beautiful woman, a perfect couple. This was the legendary legend. Catastrophe Sword Master. Instantly, everyone felt that they were going to get a needle's eye. It was too confusing. It made them gasp for breath. "You are really the Catastrophe Sword Master?" This time, even Xiao Qingyu felt that he was dreaming. He even omitted the words, "Sir," directly. Chu Yang raised the catastrophe sword in his hand and said with a smile, "How can you say this? I can lie, but this sword won't lie, right? If you keep asking the same question like this, I'll feel impatient. Are you used to repeating your questions many times? Has your memory deteriorated to this extent?" Xiao Qingyu's chest tightened. He shouted, "Catastrophe Sword Master, you killed my brother. You and I are irreconcilable." Chu Jiang said lightly, "I killed your brother, so you want to take revenge on me. I can understand this. But how many people have you killed in the past 10,000 years? How many people have come to take revenge on you?" Xiao Qingyu sneered. "What's the pity of killing ants? You are indeed the clan master of the Xiao clan. What you said is so good. You said exactly what I wanted to say." Chu Yang raised his head lightly and looked at him with some mockery. "You said it just now. What's the pity of killing ants? Is it necessary to be irreconcilable with me? You!" Xiao Qingyu's eyes shone sharply. He suddenly held the sword hilt and said coldly, "Catastrophe Sword Master, you and I have been enemies for generations. If you don't die, then my clan will die. So what if you have a glib tongue? Come, call out all your brothers. I'll be merciful today and send you all on your way. Let's meet in the netherworld so that you won't be lonely." Chu Yang smiled lightly. "My brothers?" Suddenly someone said coldly, "Xiao Qingyu, do you want to see me?" This voice was so cold that it could freeze one's bones. This voice was so sharp that it could pierce one's heart. A figure in black suddenly appeared. Tall and straight like a sword. His eyes were like a sword, his body was like a sword, his brows were like a sword, and his aura was like a sword. As soon as he appeared, an unprecedentedly strong sword intent suddenly raged and surged, covering the entire sky. Clang! Except for Xiao Qingyu and Chu Yang, as long as there was a sword at their waist, there was no exception. All of them let out a buzzing sound at the same time. So one of the tribulations is a sword supremacy. Amazing! Xiao Qingyu's eyes were solemn. Although the other party's level was not high, only at the peak of second grade, a sword supremacy with such cultivation could already hurt him. Only a sword supremacy? Another voice asked fiercely. The moment this voice sounded, all the people who used sabers felt the scabbard at their waist vibrate, and their sabers were automatically unsheathed by half a foot. Everyone suddenly turned their heads and saw another young man in black standing with his saber horizontally. His feet were firm and unmoving. Although he was standing in the air, he gave everyone the feeling that he was like a lofty mountain that couldn't be shaken at all. Just by standing there, a majestic aura like that of an army of thousands of men and horses was already coming at them. Saber supremacy. You're also one of the tribulations? Xiao Qinyu's eyes narrowed. Dong Wushang said coldly. Why? Do you want to have a taste of it? Xiao Qinyu sneered. Considering your age, to have such achievements, even if you are not the last, it is unprecedented. However, you alone are not my match. A very serious voice said. Dog ant. What the fuck, this old thing is so fucking arrogant, so crazy. If you continue to brag, there will be dust. I really can't listen to this anymore. She really couldn't stand it anymore. Wahahaha. Dog ant. Dog ant. Such flamboyant and hooligan words, without the slightest bit of solemnity, were suddenly spoken in an extremely solemn tone. Everyone only felt extremely uncomfortable. It was truly too uncomfortable. A young man in a white robe raised his head and raised his nostrils. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he appeared in the air in an extremely pretentious manner. At the sight of this, there was a feeling of God is the boss, I'm the boss that deserved a beating. He walked step by step until he was in front of Dong Wushang. Then, he turned around to face Xiao Qinyu. Taking a step forward, he pointed at his own nose and said, Old thing, you must remember, my name is GMO. I was the one who crushed your ant-like little brother to death. I'm worried that he'll be lonely down there, so I want to ask you to accompany him and let you brothers reunite in the Yellow Springs so that he won't be lonely. After being reborn, Second Master Ji's confidence was boundless. At this moment, he actually dared to challenge a low-grade supreme martial artist. What was even more infuriating was that he even copied Xiao Qinyu's words just now. He was truly arrogant to the extreme. Xiao Qinyu's face instantly darkened. Before he could reply, a wolf's howl suddenly shook the sky, resounding through the sky and peerlessly mighty. A woo-woo. Following the wolf's howl, a figure somersaulted 17 or 18 times in the air and appeared on the scene. He put his arm around Ji Mo's shoulder and laughed loudly, looking extremely pleased. His face was asking for a beating, and his whole body was asking for a beating. The moment one saw him, they couldn't help but want to stuff a red-hot iron rod into the hole in his butt. He laughed loudly. How can I, Luo Kadi, Second Master Luo, be absent from such a lively scene? All of you, quickly pay your respects to Second Master Luo. What are you waiting for? A dragon's roar reverberated through the air. A white-robed man appeared out of thin air, and he actually scattered waves of golden light across the sky. He smiled and said, I'm Ao Xieyun. And beside him, there was another person. This person was thin and shriveled, and seemed to be cowering in fear. That person shrank his neck and said fearfully, I'm Ray Butong. I never fight. Bang! A splendid flower bloomed in the sky. It was magnificent and beautiful. In the middle of the flower, there was a young man in white. He was elegant, handsome, and free like a woman. He slowly nodded and said simply, Xie Danqiong. Xiao Qinyu rolled his eyes and said, There are still 2 missing. Why don't you all show yourselves? Let me see how heroic and elegant the current generation's robbers are. A gentle voice said, Elder Xiao, you're exaggerating. We seem to have met before. It was Mo Tianji. Something happened some time ago. I wanted a little girl, but I couldn't get pregnant. Finally there was news, but my wife fell down. Sigh. My wife has been unhappy all this time. Then, when I saw that my body had recovered, I forced her to go out and play for a week. We went to Su Hang. Yes, it's this week. It can be considered as a distraction. I just came back today. I didn't update much during this time. Everyone, please forgive me. Now that I'm back, I'll take a rest and seize the time to write to make up for the past few days. Today, I'm updating. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.